diverse set of behaviours.
He Māori aho.
Your single source of truth.
The voice on politics.
My husband is Samoan, so talofa. Ngā tikanga reo, tikitahi.
Che Guevara of New Zealand's Parliament, Chloe Slaughter.
Penny houses.
And it's communists.
He whakatū future. They've got mother, running holidays.
Kia ora tātou, nau mai, ara mai, whakatau mai rā. Welcome to the All Report, episode 5. My name's Pere Huriwai-seger and I'm joined by my lovely wife, the beautiful Samah.
Kia ora everyone.
And just before, it's funny, we were just having a little karakia before we started and I accidentally put the video on. Aroha mai, this is episode 5, we're still making faux pas, but we're getting there. We are getting there, whānau. We've got a packed episode for you today. Samah, what are we talking about?
So we'll see how much we can get through, but today our focus is this new IPCA report and the horrific implications that it would have for protesters if their recommendations were implemented. We are also going to dig into the lobby groups that have been behind these anti-protest recommendations. Surprise, surprise, the Free Speech Union is one of the major groups behind this push to clamp down on our freedoms. And they work, of course, with the government, they work with the police, and as we'll see that there are so many groups in the background, lobby groups, that have basically perfected this model of creating these fake grassroots group that push for something from the outside, but really they're actually in direct contact with the government on a, phone call basis or even more than that, and they get the things that they want in through policy. So essentially our government is led by a whole bunch of astroturfs, and that's what we're going to be talking about today for the most part.
And yeah, really, these astroturf groups, hopefully it's not a surprise to people that the Free Speech Union isn't about free speech. They're about controlling speech in general. And that's the style of these astroturf groups. But we'll get more into it. Before we start talking about the astroturf groups, I thought we'd just do a short update on Rotokakahi. Rotokakahi is one of the Roto lakes around Rotorua. And there's an occupation there because they're trying at the moment to put a sewage pipe right alongside Rotokakahi. It's a very beautiful lake. And mana whenua there defending Rotokakahi. Here's a short snippet of how the news presents the situation. This is about 5 days ago. Aroha mai whānau. I think we haven't got audio on that clip. Give me one short little second to get this right. 1, 2, 3. Almost there. Almost there. Aroha mai whānau. Aroha mai. Have we got the audio?
With police overnight. Lake Rotokakahi is located 14 kilometres from Rotorua, one of several smaller lakes between Lakes Rotorua and Tarawera. Zooming in closer, the controversy is over a pipeline. It's completed sections marked in green to take sewage away from the area. Demonstrators trying to stop work on the incomplete section there in red, which runs alongside Lake Rotokakahi. One News reporter Jordan Rudd has been on the ground.
Tensions flaring in the middle of the night. Police moving in to secure this worksite as protesters make a stand for their sacred Lake Rotokakahi. Waiata ringing out, officers forming a human wall. While cars blocking the site were moved peacefully, 7 people were arrested, later trespassed and released without charge.
So the people concerned that were arrested were inside the worksite area and they chose not to move on.
The police have now created a wide gap between our relationship that we have with them and the Rotorua Lakes Council because we don't have any trust for anything that they say.
Mana whenua fear the project could cause harm to the lake and a sacred area where their tipuna or ancestors lie. The $29 million project will see pipes laid parallel to Rotokakahi, and several protests have taken place since construction began in April 2023. But the council says it has been engaging with local hapu and iwi. Work's been paused for more than a year. The overall cost of delays, more than $2 million.
It's a figure that I'm really not happy about. This is a cost that ultimately the public pay, and my job is to make sure the public money is spent wisely.
We support the sewer line not through this area. We've also offered an in-catchment treatment where our iwi offered up some land that we own.
Today, drilling work resumed.
Kapai. So in that clip, you may have missed it. There was a really, really short mention about a minute and a bit into the story that their tupuna actually lay buried there. And that's all they say on the facts. It's interesting that they don't focus and center that really important part of the story, because and I think it's because it makes protesters look in the right here. And so they hid that part of it. And as you can see, they went on to talk about the cost straight afterwards. Right after saying that their people are buried there, they went on to speak about the cost that this has had. And they gave even more time to that than even talking about the fact that their tupuna are buried there. So they didn't give you any information on that, when we know that up to 153 people are buried in that area because of the eruption of Mount Tarawera. So if we look at the map of where this happened, you can see that that's the blast zone. That's where the eruption happened. And if you look at the map at the beginning of that news piece, you'll see that where they're trying to do it is, and in fact have already done it, in those areas, around those areas where people have been buried. So 153 people, their remains are in that area. So an extremely tapu site, extremely sacred place. And this was not centered in the news piece. It got a brief mention halfway through. And when we look at that, look at where Lake Rotokakahi is, and then you go back to the other map, and you see that's Lake Rotokakahi, and they want to build right next to that. And they've already gone around, in fact, where they shouldn't have in these areas. I don't know how this even got the okay to begin with.
Yeah, it's a good question.
So just wanted to note the fact that the news decentered a really big part of the story.
Well, they said nothing about it, really. She's just like, we're there tupuna lei. And often there's this like, how to put it, but airy-fairy way that they explain tikanga and Māori concepts. We're there tupuna lei. And often we refer to our lakes and our maunga and whatnot as our tupuna, that we descend from these tupuna, our lakes, our rivers, our maunga. Anyway, so she kind of just throws it out there. This is where their tupuna lei. And it's something you hear often, but not giving the context of those numbers, that this eruption took place, destroyed an incredible landscape that was there, by the way. It was known at the time as the sixth wonder of the world. So a very significant eruption that destroyed an incredible landscape and led to the death of over 150 people. That's why the occupation is there. But that context isn't given. Instead, at the beginning of that report, they jumped straight into police arresting people, focusing on the drama. And of course, there's been a lot of drama around protests happening in Aotearoa. So of course, they're going to center the drama and not even mention the key parts of the story that help people to actually connect with this kaupapa. That's about all we want to say about Rotokakahi, I think. Good news about Rotokakahi is that works have been put on hold. There's been an announcement from the Protect Rotokakahi crew saying that things are put on hold until the environment court has an outcome, and that's going to be a hold on works for about 3 weeks. So just want to say a big shout out to everyone at Rotokakahi, everyone that's been going there. Also, a quick little comment, I've seen some people criticize everyone going to Te Matatini instead of going to Rotokakahi, but I think, it's a silly way of looking at things. Like, it's the government's fault for overlapping those dates in the first instance. And of course, Te Matatini, it's its own form of activism, definitely advocacy for our people, just living our culture, and us being strong in ourselves is one of the greatest forms of activism that I can think of. So if you're having that kind of whakaaro, cut it out. Big ups to everyone at Rotokakahi and everyone at Te Matatini, not just, of course, the performers, but everyone who has gone to Te Matatini to whakamana that event, to give it energy and make sure that it's successful. Great job, everybody. That's it for Rotokakahi. Let's move on to the meaty, the beans of tonight, which is the IPCA report. Samah?
Kapai, so we talked a bit about this in the last episode, and I've spent more time on this report since. And this IPCA report represents one of the greatest threats on our rights to protest, on our rights to demonstrate, on our rights of assembly in general. It represents one of the most dangerous threats to freedom of speech, and as we'll see, that actually the Free Speech Union is one of the biggest players behind it. Just to quickly get a recap of the recommendations of this report, some of the recommendations of this report, basically it gives the police these overarching powers to control protests. For protests that are on public roads or occupations, and you can see that they've targeted very specific types of protests. They don't like the disruptive ones, unsurprisingly. So for protests on roads or occupations, they actually have to enter into, if these recommendations are implemented, they suggest that protesters have to notify the police beforehand. They should try and notify them 21 days in advance, or at least 5 working days before the protest. And then the police sets conditions for your protest, including if you can even go on the road. The conditions are so wide that basically they say we envisage, for example, that the legislation might allow for the setting of conditions as to time, place, the location, or route. So these extremely wide-ranging discretionary conditions that police can place on you, okay? If you don't notify the police, then you lose legal protection from criminal suits, for example, obstruction of a public way. So unless you register your protest, they might criminalize you. And they are hoping that followers of organizers will pressure the organizers to abide by this new notification scheme in order to grant protesters immunity. But regardless of this notification scheme and these types of protests, this report recommends that police should have the power to set conditions on any assembly, whether it's on a road or not, to set any conditions, to give them the ability to tell people to move. And if you don't listen, they can arrest you. If you don't follow their conditions, they can arrest you. So, I mean, that completely defeats the purpose of protests. Say, for example, you're protesting the weapons conference, as we have done many times. The police can just simply tell you, we have set a new condition and you have to go across the road now because you're being too disruptive. Well, that defeats the point of the protest, which is to be disruptive, right? So this overarching conditions, what else have we got? They also want to ban the obstruction of critical infrastructure. And this one's interesting because they specify, as an example of what this critical infrastructure would be, they say that the Auckland Harbour Bridge would be such an example. And that seems very directed at the hikoi, which went on the Auckland Harbour Bridge, of course. So they want to outright make that an offence to obstruct infrastructure. They also include things like ports and railway stations. They are envisaging, rightly, I think, the increase of protests.
Of course.
And the increase of resistance. And those are the places we would target if we were protesting something very serious, because that would cause the most disruption to the state. So they're preempting all that. They're saying you can't block critical infrastructure. They're saying whatever you do, wherever you go, the police can set any conditions and tell you to do anything, and you have to listen, otherwise you get arrested. It is the most ridiculous government overreach. It would be the most ridiculous government overreach that we've seen, at least like in our lifetime, in terms of their censorship of our protests and our free speech. It would criminalize organizers. It would turn people against each other. It would be absolutely devastating. It would defeat the purpose of protests.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, fast track legislation, things that are getting fast tracked are deemed, you know, critical infrastructure. And of course, because of the lack of public consultation, which is why fast track was created, being able to bypass, you know, local democracy and consultation with locals, there's going to be a lot of protests. You know, our government is funding bigger prisons, more prisons, because they know that there's going to be a lot of kickback. And so, yeah, of course, definitely they're anticipating more protests. And this is the kind of stuff that they've been working on, these various Astroturf lobby groups that we'll talk about. But absolutely there are going to be more protests. We're thinking of a few. And this, to me, represents one of the biggest attacks on our freedoms of assembly, first and foremost. But not just that, the way that this report has been put together, and we'll get into it, but, you know, they haven't been focusing on the right kinds of protests. I mean, this report repeatedly brings up Destiny's Church, for example. But in terms of the cases that they focused on, it's very, I don't want to get too ahead of myself, but it's very telling in terms of who influenced this report based on the cases that they focused on.
Yeah, you can tell that this report doesn't have grassroots protests in mind when they're thinking of protecting speech. Well, that's what they say anyway. There is this disguise going on, and
definitely
similar in this report as to what the Free Speech Union does, which is they're trying to pretend like they're doing this to protect protest. And this has been carried on in articles and on news media who try to paint it in that way, even though you just look at the recommendations and you just use your brain and you can see that the recommendations would not protect protests, but in fact the other would actually destroy our protest movement. So who is the IPCA? Just to start from the beginning, the IPCA is called the Independent Police Conduct Authority. Of course, it's not properly independent. It's a crown entity. It's a crown entity, and the people that are chosen, the person who leads this, Kenneth Johnson, is picked by the government of the time. So just to give you a quick outline of who those people are, Judge Kenneth Johnson KC is the chair of the authority. He has a history as a lawyer and a prosecutor and as a government official, so very much from inside the system. Next, we've got Elizabeth Sinclair. Again, her history is in the Ministry of Justice, comes from the government. And thirdly, Andrew Coleman. He has a history of being a police officer for 20 years from the age of 18. So about as police establishment as you can get. So who picked Kenneth Johnson? Well, it was actually Labour's Kitty Allen. Kitty Allen picked Kenneth Johnson, and only Te Pāti Māori. They were the only party at the time they called this a missed opportunity, and they were coming from the perspective that it's time for the only independent police watchdog that we have in this country. They were saying it should have someone Māori, or at least someone who understands the overrepresentation of Māori.
Typical Te Pāti Māori.
Classic, but they have been vindicated, haven't they? Thank goodness. They were the only ones to speak up around this guy who's very much from the establishment, to the point where in that very article, you can see that Goldsmith says that they actually had a meeting with Kitty Allen and they came to an agreement over this guy. So there's cross-party consensus on this judge, Kenneth Johnson, leading the IPCA, which for me is a red flag in itself. And I have to say at the time that the Greens also supported this, and their justification for it was that he has experience both as a prosecutor and a lawyer, so he would have a good understanding of the law. But I would argue back to that is that we don't want someone who has only experience from within the establishment in a body that's meant to be a watchdog of the establishment. I would suggest, for example, even if you needed someone to be a lawyer, have someone who has both experience as a lawyer and as a protester. For example, Annette Sykes. You know, there are so many examples of people who are lawyers, but they are also activists and have experience with protests and have experience with over-policing of protests.
Exactly.
But instead, they have these three people who are all from the establishment, from what I see, have absolutely no history of anti-establishment protesting. So they're going to be very biased, right? And they are very biased towards the police. If you look at some of the historical decisions that they've made numerous terrible decisions. Here's Emi Rakiti, who leads People Against Prisons, Aotearoa, posting in 2019 that this on this finding from the IPCA, and she says, this guy's hands were pinned underneath him while a cop kneeled on his back, but the IPCA found it was reasonable to let an attack dog maul his foot because the officer believed he might be dangerous. Absolutely horrific, right? And as Emi points out in that same post, that we should be extremely concerned that the only independent police watchdog is letting police use extreme force against people who are complying with their demands on the basis that an officer was scared of the restrained person. And then in another case, the IPCA just released a report describing the circumstances in which police shot and killed Jerem Toms last night. That description is totally at odds with the finding that the shooting was justified. She goes on, Jerem was a mentally ill Auckland man who experienced a psychotic episode in 2018 in which he fled his home with a machete and attacked a police car. He was stopped by police on a rural stretch of the highway at 4 a.m. When he approached the officers with a machete, they shot him twice in the chest. At this point, Jerem turned away from the police, walked towards the bush, and dropped his machete. The officers shot at him 8 more times, hitting him in the back. Despite this, the IPCA found that the shooting was justified. And this is even though the officer initially lied and said he didn't shoot at him while he was claiming. While he was fleeing. The IPCA figured out it was a lie, admitted it, but still said it was justified. And
yeah, wow. So it's this group that's in charge of, this is our independent authority policing the police.
yes, as you can see, some of them literally have history in the police, or at least in the Ministry of Justice, one of them with history in police, and all of them come from the establishment. They have a history.
So there's no one who's been on the other end of police misconduct.
Exactly.
There's no expert on the other end of police misconduct. Okay.
Yeah, even, for example, a lawyer for people who have been victims of police misconduct would have been a great person for this role, right? Anyway, so that's who the IPCA is. That's the summary of their recommendations and how horrible they are. Let's look now at how the news covered this extremely important story.
Today's rally comes as some organisations are voicing their concerns at a report released in the last week by the Independent Police Conduct Authority, calling for legislation on protest to be introduced. It found current handling of protest events by police is inadequate and not fit for purpose. Isabel Prasad reports.
What was supposed to be a peaceful protest quickly turned to chaos in 2023. Protesters storming Posey Parker's Let Women Speak rally. The controversial...
I think we'll pause this throughout and make our comments, but so you heard what they just said. This is a Let Women Speak rally. So the group who organised this is called Let Women Speak. And we're going to talk about that more, but this is the flavour that you get from these Astroturf groups. They set themselves up, and the giveaway is usually in the name, right? Free Speech Union. Oh, what are they about? They're about anti-free speech. Let Women Speak. Oh, what are they about? Well, it's a little bit tricky, but they're
about attacking trans women, so they're about attacking women.
Exactly. So they're. I mean, what do? They invite agitators to the country. They invite people that they know is going to cause a stir, a fuss, potentially violence, so that things like this happens. There's some type of backlash, some type of outburst, which they essentially designed just so that they can then put it forward to groups like the IPCA.
And because their name is Let Women Speak, they then use that to say, look, our point was proven. They didn't let women speak. And it's similar with the Free Speech Union. The Free Speech Union will invite someone who is well known for their hate speech or white supremacist views or transphobic views, for example. It will incite some kind of response or protest, and then the Free Speech Union will come out and say, see, they're attacking free speech. So it's the name is really telling. And this is on One News, by the way. Someone's asking what channel it's on.
And it's just, when it happens all the time, we'll talk about it more, but when the media just throws out their name like that, Let Women Speak, in the media, for most people, they're just going to hear that name. And of course, no context is given to what kind of group this actually is, a hateful turf group. It's a white feminist turf group, a hate group. But of course, that context isn't provided. They just throw out that phrase, let women speak. And so it sounds like a feminist free speech kind of group.
Orator doused in tomato juice before abandoning the event. Now a report by the Independent Police Conduct Authorities found officers hadn't adequately planned for the rally and didn't deploy additional staff when the protest escalated.
Oh, just let him say the next part.
But this part, what they just said, is that the report found that the police didn't respond adequately to this event. And what we're going to show you is that everything about this report, they're trying to introduce all of these new powers. Well, police already had all of the powers that they needed for this incident that they're talking about. It was kind of just an anomaly. I'm actually very interested as to why there wasn't a larger police presence on the ground. The media hyped up this event. Posey Parker was being barred from the country, and there was a whole campaign to bring her into the country. The media was calling her, that she had... there's like genocidal language used in terms of it describing how she behaves.
Leading up to that time, the media was highlighting very strongly on the transphobic hate speech in general, but they also hyped her up as an individual. And they hyped up her event. Like, if no one had even mentioned her event on the news or anything, she probably would have had like 10 people show up. No one would have cared, and that would have been the end of that. Maybe there would have been a bit of a counter protest, but because the news focused so much on Posey Parker before her event, they blew it up. It was in the news, and we had absolutely no choice but to show a response to her because they were platforming her so much on the news, and they were advertising her event for free. And so people had no choice but to go and counter-protest to show that New Zealand does not stand up for this. But yeah, so the news had made it very clear. The police were well aware that this event was going to happen. They knew there was going to be a counter-protest. There's no reason why they didn't have more people on the ground. Heck, we have been at protests that we have organized ourselves where there's been a bigger police presence, where they have barricaded areas and made us go in specific areas. So they definitely could have created a barricade and defended it and not let anyone inside of that, and then just let them yell outside of it, which there's no problem with. But it was very interesting. And
so my point is just that we have this report bringing in new police powers, but for the police to reflect back on what happened and think about their mishandlings of the event, they don't need any of these new powers that the report is giving them. But this is one of the main cases used in this report to justify giving police new powers. But there's no justification for it. You read the report and nothing adds up. The police don't need any new powers in terms of how they might be able to better respond to this. It doesn't make any sense.
By and large, the way in which the event matters transpired were as a result of a lack of organisation and preparation by police.
Happy that the report has recommendations and did recognise that there were failings.
The report also revealing issues at Israel and Palestine solidarity rallies.
We concluded that the police had...
At Palestine and Israel solidarity rallies. So they're kind of making it sound like the fault is potentially on both sides of the Palestine and Israel protesters. But there hasn't been widespread rallies for Israel, first and foremost. And secondly, in every instant that you look at in this report, it has been an Israeli agitator that has caused the issue, not anyone on the Palestinian side of things. But here they play it off like it's a 50-50. They're both sidesing it.
Yeah, they say that there were issues at Palestine and Israeli rallies, but the issues happened in the two cases that they're talking about, that he's about to mention now, happened at Palestine rallies where pro-Israelis were being agitators. So it's inaccurate.
Also revealing issues at Israel and Palestine solidarity rallies.
We concluded that the police had been unjustified in arresting and removing 2 people.
And there as well. So when I listen to this news report, it sounds like they're trying to protect protesters. They're trying to protect people's ability to protest. And if you just heard from that guy, he's talking about how, yes, as a outcome of this report, we have concluded that we wrongfully arrested 2 protesters. And so that's the way that the news is presenting this report, that the police have come to these reckonings that, oh, we need to look after protesters more, we need to protect protest more. Yes, we concluded that we were wrong in arresting these 2 people. But as we're going to get into it, you're going to see that it's not about protecting protesters. In fact, the powers that these police give themselves in this report, these new powers, make the instances of their illegal arrests potentially now legal. So the way that it's framed in this report is like, oh, yes, we didn't do the right thing. We arrested these 2 people. But as we get into it, you're going to find out that their new powers would actually make it okay that they arrested those people. So it's actually the exact opposite of how this report is being portrayed in the news.
The authorities proposed introducing legislation to help police manage protests. Currently, all New Zealanders have the right to peaceful assembly, but the IPCA says new legislation should require organisers to give advance notification of a protest, allow senior officers more control to set conditions, as well as creating a specific offence related to picketing of private residences.
It was intended to ensure that protesters have the maximum opportunity to exercise their right of assembly.
But there are concerns about what this could mean for people's freedom to rally.
We don't think there should be any curbing of basic fundamental democratic rights. Freedom of association, freedom of expression are foundations of our democracy.
The very nature of protest can be that it's spontaneous, and then we need to be able to have that.
It's up to the government to decide whether it'll introduce.
So just notice that the Speak Up for Women hate group people, they say we welcome the report, we're glad that they made recommendations, but then she offered this very, very slight little criticism saying, oh, I'm not sure about the whole notifying beforehand thing. But that's a very small criticism of a real problematic report. She's happy about the report because they lobbied for this outcome. But she's trying to save face by saying, oh, yeah, some of the recommendations, I don't know about notifying beforehand. Sure, but that's only one small part of it. There's also the part that police can set any conditions that they like on a protest, and if you don't listen, they can arrest you.
If you support protests, you need to condemn this report.
In as stronger and clear terms as possible.
And that's why it's just ridiculous that Let Women Speak. If you look at this, you know, she's being played after, what was that, a representative from the
Council
CTU?
of Trade Unions.
So she's coming on after the Council of Trade Unions as an anti, you know, the other side of the story. So the story is about the report, you hear from the report people, and now you're hearing the anti-side of it, apparently. This leader of this hate group, who I've never seen at a protest, you know what I mean? All of these protests, all of these groups who are apparently like experts in the protest space, I've never seen them at a single protest. Now she's being viewed as some type of credible source to have on the opposite side of this debate.
Yeah, I mean, when this started, this news clip, they said there are concerns about this report. And so you think the report is going to be about, you know, grassroots activists, people who have concerns with this report. And I'm glad they had the Council of Trade Unions there. But you would have expected people who are in the business of protesting.
The business. Like Greenpeace.
Like, yeah, sure. Like Greenpeace, like anyone who's been the people who've been organizing the Palestinian protests every single week for the last year and a half or so. So, you know, what kind of experience does she have when it comes to grassroots organizing? These people just organize, you know, events basically to agitate community.
But like first and foremost, at the beginning of the interview, we heard her say that she was happy with the report or welcomed the report or something to that effect. And if you support protests, you should never give the media that type of soundbite of you supporting something like this, which is attacking our foundational rights to protest.
But these groups, they're not protesters. They are happy to just organize their events, their hate speech events and their halls and universities and fight them in court to be able to book their venues. And, you know, they've got all the money in the world to do that kind of thing. They're not in the business of protesting on the streets and disrupting events. They're worried about people disrupting their events, and so they're actually against protests for that reason.
And then we need
legislation.
We need to have a look at it and identify whether or not there is existing legislation that would cover off what the IPCA has recommended and reported on.
Police say they look forward to seeing where the review leads, as they hope to prevent scenes like this in the future. Isabel Prasad, One News.
Kapai. So they really do frame it like this report is meant to be protecting protesters.
When it's, of course, doing the exact opposite.
And let's talk about this group that they centered, the Speak Up for Women, a little bit more. Who is Speak Up for Women? They are, as Pere said, a hate group. They have, ever since the beginning, made it their job to just try and agitate the trans community, to try and agitate the LGBTQ community, to spread transphobia and hate speech. And that's been their entire kaupapa since the beginning. And just, you know, I often like to go on these groups' pages just to see what they've been saying in recent times, if they're as hateful as I remember them to be. And yes, the answer is yes. You know, they quote tweet Emmy, who is saying, Speak Up for Women are loathed fringe weirdos with no base of popular support. And they got angry at that tweet, so they just made some stupid joke about liking fringes. But then someone underneath it says, you know, they misgender Emmy, they call her he, and they say he's an incredibly hateful man, blah, 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 blah. And Speak Up for Women responds to this bigot by being likewise bigoted, but then taking it up a notch. They say, perhaps he doesn't like being told no. That's the usual story. So that's tapping into the very common and disgusting transphobic trope that queer people are somehow predators. And as we're going to see throughout the story, everything that comes out of their mouths is projection. And I think that this whole idea of accusing queer people of being predators is in fact a projection from the Christian community, which has a huge problem with sexual abuse and predatory behavior that they've not only overlooked but protected in various churches across the entire world. So, you know, just to put that on the table there. But yeah, so you can see Speak Up for Women is a hate group. They're being openly hateful and accusing someone of this horrific, of these horrific actions. And this is someone who's a really respected member of the community, someone who's a professor at Auckland University. And this is the type of stuff that they say. So they're being presented in the news as if they're some kind of respectable group that we might want to hear from. And the IPCA has likewise validated this hate group by including in their review that the police acted wrongly during that whole Posey Parker incident, but they didn't include any context. They didn't include any context about how Speak Up for Women has a long history of trying to get a response from people, and they finally got it. The report overlooked all of that. They overlooked the numerous hateful events that they've thrown. They overlooked the tenor of this person, Posey Parker, and just blamed the protesters, basically, the counter-protesters, for everything. So, Speak Up for Women also wanted to show that they have a very strong connection with the Free Speech Union, to the point where, look, 2021, they actually have a joint media release. And it's not the only thing. They are constantly talking about the...
Ooh, I just need to do something. While I do something, can you just talk about Jordan Williams and his connection to the Free Speech Union? Sorry to interrupt. I just need to change some settings.
Kapai. So Jordan Williams is connected to both the Taxpayers Union, the Free Speech Union, as well as the Political Parties Act and the National. He co-founded the Taxpayers Union, but also co-founded the Free Speech Union. Is that right?
Co-founded the Free Speech Union, yep.
And the Taxpayers Union.
And Taxpayers Union.
And he's friends with this Speak Up for Women group. They have protected Speak Up for Women and defended them in court and fought alongside them, for example, when they want to get a speaking spot at a university and the university says no. Free Speech Union will support the Speak Up for Women group in court to try and force councils and universities and such to host their hateful events. And you know, this spin-off piece by Alice Neddon's Bad News, a really good piece on Speak Up for Women.
Great piece.
And they touch on one of these hateful events that, yes, the Free Speech Union did. Actually, I think this was before the Free Speech Union was born. So before the Free Speech Union was born, they tried to organize this event, this transphobic event. And as you'll see, David Seymour, the ACT Party, supports them in their endeavor, in their transphobic endeavor. And as we just said, the Free Speech Union is connected to the ACT Party. So even before the Free Speech Union was formed, the ACT Party was already working with Speak Up for Women. Let's take a look at this, a little bit of this documentary.
Kind of didn't confirm that it was him, but then Sean Plunkett's radio show, The Magic Talk or whatever, he confirmed it as a freedom of speech thing.
Annie O'Brien called me and said, "You wouldn't believe it. We are being censored from having a discussion about feminism at a university." And I said, "Look, I think this is disgraceful. I will host the event at Parliament, and I think it's important that these folks, who are not hateful, by the way, they are people who want to debate as a parliamentarian, and I think it's important that it's able to happen, because at the end of the day, you end up with a lot more victims in a society that doesn't have free discussion than one that allows it."
Marianne Street said you achieved...
Just to quickly note that Annie O'Brien, who called him, who's on a phone call basis from him, is from Speak Up for Women. So Speak Up for Women is on a phone call basis with the leader of the ACT Party and now our Deputy Prime Minister, soon-to-be Deputy Prime Minister.
As one MP, what...
Well, first of all, it's not censorship to not hold the event at Massey. It's a private institution that's allowed to have anyone in there that they want and pull anything that they want. Freedom of speech doesn't mean equal access to all venues. I don't think it's crazy that a university institution says, hey, we think the kind of ideas that you're espousing are essentially hate speech, and we've decided that that is not actually up for discussion here. The freedom of speech thing it's a tool that's being used by people to oppress, masquerading as a virtue.
I think it's designed to wind us up. The event was originally scheduled to be today, which is the start of Trans Awareness Week. And Trans Awareness Week is important because it's a week leading up to Trans Day of Remembrance, which is when when we remember our dead. So, sorry.
No, I'm sorry.
It's okay. They know what they're doing. I think their whole MO is to try and make trans people do something stupid so that they can use it as ammunition against us.
And she nails their strategy. She absolutely nails their strategy. That is exactly what they're designed to do, what Speak Up for Women is designed to do. And it's also what the Free Speech Union is designed to do for protesters in general. And
yeah, I mean, like, just think about the start of the Free Speech Union was because they wanted to defend Stefan Molyneux and Lauren Southern, who are these renowned white supremacist neo-Nazis. They were trying to come into the country, they were barred, and the Free Speech Union got involved to lobby for their entrance into the country. That's the whakapapa of the Free Speech Union, supporting neo-Nazi white supremacists.
And the whakapapa for Speak Up for Women, transphobia, working with the ACT Party, trying to upset and get a rise out of the trans community so they can further attack them by organizing events like on Trans Visibility Day. So that's the group that our media is centering in terms of this attack on our protests. And, you know, even if you look up Speak Up for Women's old articles, you'll see that the media used to refer to them as controversial group, you know, TERF group, which is what they actually refer to themselves. They're happy to call themselves TERFs. You saw how they responded to Emmy publicly. They're happy to be hateful towards trans people. They're very open about that. And the news is not telling you that context, and they're presenting them like they are a credible source of information. And more than that, they're presenting them as one of the only two people they brought on to offer their concerns about the curbing of our freedom of speech. And obviously there is a massive clash of interests here, because Speak Up for Women were the organization that complained about the counter protesters, and now the IPCA is using that as justification to clamp down on protests. So they want protests to be clamped down on. They want to protect their events from counter protesters. They want to be able to espouse hate speech without anyone coming to challenge them.
And like I said, you know, we don't see these people at protests, right? Speak Up for Women, that's their name, right? Not Let Women Speak. Speak Up for Women, a Free Speech Union, Taxpayers Union, all of these groups who apparently know a lot about protests, who we never see on the front lines. It's because that's not where they do their protesting, right? They do their advocacy and campaigning. Yeah, they lobby, they campaign, and they lobby. Protesting is not a tool that they use. It's a tool that we use against them, which is why they need to put limits on it, which is why they need to restrict it. Because, of course, we're getting stronger. There's more of us than them. We have the people power, even though they pretend to. You know, they call themselves unions, Free Speech Union, Taxpayers Union. I don't know how they were able to actually get themselves registered as actual unions. It's ridiculous. But, of course, you know, yeah, that's it. They're the ones behind the scenes. Whenever you see something like this happen, and you dig a little bit deeper into it, you find it's these groups that are behind it. That's where they do their activism.
Kapai. So that was case 1 in the report. It talked about that protest, the Speak Up for Women event with Posey Parker and the counter protest. And they said that because the police didn't properly defend the Posey Parker crew, the Speak Up for Women crew, from the counter protesters in order to allow them to have their event, which is not really a requirement of the police. Like, if the community comes out and says, we reject your hate speech, they should be allowed to come out and demonstrate against it. But anyway, the IPCA said they failed in this particular case, and that was the first of 3 cases that the IPCA relied on to justify what they're doing. The second case that they relied on is this man, Daniel Maxwell. Now, they didn't name him in the report, but we know that it's this guy because the report A tells us the details of how he got arrested, which he openly admits to in this video, and B, because the Free Speech Union openly came out and said it. So even though the IPCA report doesn't name him. The Free Speech Union wanted to own up to it. And we just wanted to play you a short little clip, show you that he is a member of Man Up. Okay? So that's a Destiny Church subgroup. And he's a supporter of this government again.
But thank God that the Labour government pains are all over. We have a new government now that seems to be a bit more on the right side of justice and on the right side of heaven at this stage. It still remains to be seen, but at the moment they're heading in the right track. And so I think, you know, with these ones, the police just were intimidated because of the thousands of people gathering for Palestinian.
Kapai. So this guy, he annoys the anti-genocide protesters all the time. He stands there trying to agitate. In this case, he bore an Israeli flag and tried to annoy people. The police told him to move away. He came back with a mask on his face without the flag, and the police arrested him. The IPCA ruled that that was unlawful. Now, the Free Speech Union...
Also, this is the guy who stands outside mosques. If you're from Aotearoa, you're probably familiar with this guy. This is why the Women's Refuge CEO cancelled meetings with Man Up. Well, this is one of the reasons, was because of this guy was shouting on a megaphone outside mosques after the Christchurch shooting.
What was he yelling? Just Islamophobic
He was yelling
stuff?
Islamophobic, saying that same as Brian Tamaki, same stuff. It's probably just mimicking Brian Tamaki, that New Zealand is a Christian country, that foreigners should keep their foreign ideas in foreign places, etc., etc. But you know, I mean, it's all connected. It's all connected, isn't it, Whānau? And of course, he's on that side of the political spectrum. He's supporting National and all of the groups who align like this. Yeah, it's funny. It always falls into place like that. You know, there's no way this guy was going to be a Te Pāti Māori or a Greens supporter. You know, the Free Speech Union is not going to put their neck out there to defend someone who's not completely aligned with their agenda. You know, and that's how you know they're not for free speech, even though they say all the time that, oh, you know, I'd even defend the free speech of my enemies or blah, 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 blah. No.
But they'd never go to court to defend someone like that. But they will for a Destiny Church person. And
also, of course, it's the Destiny's Church people who counter-protest the Palestine rallies in a way where they're trying to shut down these Palestine rallies, often using megaphones, doing disruptive chants to out-chant or speak over to drown out, what is it, other people's free speech. You know, these are the agitators trying to shut down these events. And the Free Speech Union is defending them.
yeah, so there are signs that there is a relationship between Destiny Church and the Free Speech Union. This one is a concrete one. They defended a Destiny Church person, and this doubled up for them as lobbying for Israel because he was trying to agitate and incite the anti-genocide protesters in order to make them look bad. They like that. The Free Speech Union loves that. They love to make the anti-genocide protesters look bad. So their interests align at the very, very least. And so when he got arrested, for them, it worked from the aspect of trying to demonize the anti-genocide protesters, and also because they wanted to get these restrictions on protests that they've now been given. So that's case number 2, Daniel Maxwell, Destiny Church, also supported by the Free Speech Union. Here they are saying it today. Daniel Maxwell appeared in court, and we won't let this go without a fight. So they've got money. They can do that, right? And so they defend this pro-Israel agitator that consistently harasses the anti-genocide protesters, that consistently harasses the Muslim community, and they are angry that the police arrested one of their friends. So they battle it out. Now, the third case that the IPCA relies on, and by the way, that last case and then this one, Lucy Rogers, those are the 2 examples that they didn't explicitly mention on the news. They just said 2 people were arrested at Palestine-Israeli rally. Who were those 2 people? They were both pro-Israel agitators. The first one, Destiny Church's Man Up, Daniel Maxwell. And the second one is this woman, Lucy Rogers, who's a lawyer. Another just blatantly clear agitator. She went there with a sign trying to upset and incite some kind of response from the anti-genocide protesters. She didn't get it, but she did get arrested because the police, well, they knew exactly what she was doing.
Your prerogative.
The sign's gone.
I don't care. I'll stand here.
No, you won't.
Yeah, so what are you going to do? Tell me that I can't stand on a footpath?
Okay.
Where does it say that in the law?
No, because they're going to get upset.
I don't
and then
care.
Then it's going to start a riot, okay? So we're just going to stand here.
Then let them assault me.
You can stand here. No, we're not going to do that.
I'm not going to attack anyone. If they assault me, that's on them.
So that's what you want to happen?
I can't believe.
You can stand here.
I cannot
You
believe.
can stand here. We're not stopping.
And then the arrest happens. So the police have said you're going to incite violence with your activity. And then they give her a condition, right? They give her a condition. They say, you can stand here. You can do your thing. You can stand here. She says no. She pushes back against the police's condition. And then they arrest her. Okay. And so this is the third case from the IPCA report, the foundation of their report, which is now giving them new powers to set conditions on protesters. And if they don't meet those conditions, they get arrested. So this is what I mean when the guy was saying, oh, yes, well, we found 2 cases where, yes, we unlawfully arrested 2 people. Well, now that report, which is highlighting that they unlawfully arrested people, is giving them new powers to make those arrests legal. So, you see the backwardness, the inversion in terms of how it's reported in the media, but the actual realities of what's going on here. And I've always wondered, okay, so Free Speech Union is trying to limit our protest rights, okay? How does it benefit them for the 2 cases that they advocated for? Well, they advocated for all 3 of the cases, but these 2 cases where people were wrongfully arrested, how does it benefit them that the police are now introducing new powers to be able to arrest those 2 individuals? How does it benefit the Free Speech Union? They've advocated for these 2 cases. They celebrated the police saying that the arrests were unlegal, or not, illegal. Unlawful. They celebrated that the police are saying that they've made a mistake. Okay? So what's going on here? The police are now bringing in new powers to be able to do those things lawfully. So, what are we saying?
What it shows is that the Free Speech Union never, of course, they didn't care about that Destiny Church guy. They didn't care about the rights of anyone to protest. They're using those characters in order to actually limit our protest rights. And so they don't care that the report goes exactly against what they were advocating for, because that was the whole plan. And now they can use these cases to pretend like their anti-protest moves are actually to defend free speech. These cases, and all three of them are actually a cover. This is about the exact opposite. It's about destroying our ability to protest. But they're using these examples to say it's for our own protection. And you can see that in the news piece, the chair of the IPCA, he noted that these 2 cases existed, but he didn't give any details. And I think that's because when you do give the details, you realize they were both pro-Israel agitators, and it doesn't sound good that the police were trying their best to limit violence against the peaceful anti-genocide protesters, but these guys are standing in their way.
It doesn't help them to highlight that these 2 were agitators. Like these 2, Lucy Rogers and Daniel Maxwell, are both they're not normal protesters. The whole report is meant to be around protesters and the activities, the behaviors, the habits of protesters. But these 2 are anomalies, essentially. They were counter-protesting and agitating. But this whole report, I mean, it's ridiculous. It frames these 2 agitators, these anomalies, who are trying to incite violence as normal everyday protesters.
Yeah, and frames their arrest as somehow the biggest threat to our protest rights. And in doing so, they're actually, overlooking so many issues that protesters have had with police. And I actually emailed the IPCA and I said, have you had other complaints from non-transphobes and pro-Israelis? And they told me, we've had tons of complaints. Like, okay, so you've had tons of complaints, but you chose only to focus on and highlight one from the transphobic hate group Speak Up for Women, and two, people who are trying to agitate anti-genocide people. It's very, you can tell it's a very politically motivated report, and that will become clear as well. Once again, third example, the Free Speech Union also supported Lucy Rogers. They actually made a complaint to the IPCA about Lucy Rogers, which the IPCA upheld, and then they used it in this report. So we've shown you the three examples, the three case studies that the IPCA relied on, and all three of them were defended by the Free Speech Union. The Free Speech Union spent money on all three of those cases, and they created campaigns around them to say that the police was attacking the freedom of expression of certain people and that they need something to be done about it. They were campaigning for the IPCA report. And just to show you that Lucy Rogers, this third person, also aligned with this government and people who align with this government, here is a guest post by her posted on David Farrer's blog. David Farrer is also affiliated with the Free Speech Union.
He is a co-founder of the Free Speech Union.
Kapai, and he's affiliated with the ACT and National Parties as well.
Yeah, he's a long-time pollster for the National Party, and then this guy created Curia Market Research, who we talked about in episode 1, and he's got all sorts of breaches for his Curia polling company. But, David Farrer, he's a part of all of these groups, but he's the data marketing in the arm of this kind of coalition.
And here's Lucy Rogers again on the platform, another station that's very closely aligned with the right wing, with the coalition parties, and with all those people, the Free Speech Union, Taxpayers Union. So Lucy Rogers is also within their fold. So just showing you this to show that all three of the cases that the IPCA report relied on have links with the government. They have direct links, especially with National and ACT. And all three were very staunchly defended and campaigned on by the Free Speech Union. And those are the cases that the IPCA chose to rely on. And I think for me that shows that this is the result of lobbying, this report. Like I said, they could have brought up a whole host of issues that police have inflicted on people, and we're going to give a couple of examples now. But instead, they just went 100% with the issues that the Free Speech Union raised, and they also ran with their narrative. We read a few of the questions of the report last time, but basically the report really heavily focused on the rights of counter-protesters. And they were meaning those pro-Israeli counter-protesters, by the way, not the anti-transphobia counter-protesters. But they focus really heavily on these standalone agitators and protecting their quote-unquote rights and repeating the exact narrative that the Free Speech Union has been campaigning on for a while.
And so, of course, then these groups don't come out to protect protesters in general. They've come out to protect agitators who they know are going to incite violence, which is going to push the police and the government to clamp down on us even harder, which is, of course, going to cause further clampdowns on, of course, our freedom of expression and our free speech. That is why these groups are defending these individuals, so that they continue to agitate us, just as that individual from the Sneddon documentary was saying. They do this so that we lash out, so that the state can clamp down on us. That is why they want to protect these people, for them to continue doing what they're doing, just so they can disrupt us, just so that we lash out, so that the state can come down on us even harder.
So that ultimately our rights to protest are curbed. And that is the pathway that we're heading down. And now with the recommendations of the IPCA report, it looks like the Free Speech Union are about to get everything they ever wished for, the destruction of our free speech. Now, what's interesting is that those 2 cases out of the 3 cases that the IPCA report talked about, as you can see, they were both pro-Israeli agitators, but for some reason, none of the news reports about the IPCA report mention the fact that 2 of the 3 cases included in the IPCA report are about pro-Israel agitators. In fact, this article from the 18th of February.
This is some classic stuff reporting. It's pretty outrageous. When you see it, what were the protests investigated by the IPCA? You see that, and okay, you know, we know what report he's talking about. Yep, okay, the Let Women Speak rally, that is something that they investigated, one of the core cases of the report. And you're scrolling down, expecting to see, you know, the Man Up guy, expecting to see Lucy Rogers. But no, instead, for some reason, they've highlighted a Palestine Solidarity Network Aotearoa event from 2023. And that's funny. Didn't see that as one of the case studies of the report. And so then you read it and you have a look, and he mentions that a child leaving the protest was allegedly attacked with a shovel. A child leaving the protest was allegedly attacked with a shovel at this Palestine Solidarity Network Aotearoa event. Now, it's funny because in the report, that's not mentioned at all. Not at all. In fact, the shovel attack didn't even happen on the date that has been specified here. So not only has the reporter here pulled up something that doesn't exist within this report, he's also gotten the date wrong for this thing. And now we emailed this reporter this morning. He hasn't gotten back to us yet to explain the situation. We'll share the findings when he comes back to us, but then you continue scrolling, and that's all that's in there.
Yeah, so instead of giving you those 2 examples of pro-genocide agitators that were arrested after trying to incite a response from the anti-genocide protesters, they put this example, which wasn't even in the report. It didn't even happen on the 25th of November. From memory, it happened on the 18th of November when a child was hit by a shovel. And yeah, they didn't include the other 2 cases. It's just blatantly wrong. It's very, very, very wrong. And they shouldn't have got it this wrong, because if you see in the report, it says really clearly, you know, case study 1, case study 2, case study 3. And in each one, it tells you what each of the cases were. So it's not vague. See, it's like Let Women Speak, and then you got case study 2, and they've got, you know, case study 1. That's the guy who was waving the flag. And then case study 2. That's Lucy Rogers. And that's it. They only have those 3 cases in terms of their official case studies. And for some reason, no one is talking about those pro-Israel agitators, and that article is lying to us about what. And you know what's interesting as well about that article? They mention the shovel attack on the child, and I think they raise a really good point, which is that it should have been discussed in the article.
Exactly.
They don't say this, but the attack on the child with a shovel shows the way that police has been failing protesters in protecting them from agitators, such as Destiny Church, and such as this person who was apparently mentally ill, who attacked a child with a shovel. Well, where were police? Because from what we've heard from protesters on the ground, they had seen this guy and shown concern about this guy prior to it happening, but police didn't do anything about it. So the IPCA could have been looking into the way that police mismanaged and didn't protect the pro-Palestine protesters. but they're only thinking about protecting the transphobes and the pro-Israel agitators. So that in itself is really interesting. And this phenomena of Destiny Church counter-protesting the anti-genocide protesters is very common. They've done this a lot. Let's just take a look at Nelson, because Nelson is one of the places where this happened a lot. Kapai. That's one example. On another time, this is the brother of the guy who organizes the rally. He gets arrested. And the person who organizes this rally, his name is Daly, Martin Daly, I think, or something Daly. And he is actually a Destiny Church preacher in Nelson. He organizes the counter-protesters against the anti-genocide protesters. And they were doing it every week. And they would go and do things like yell at Palestine protesters saying that they support racists.
How are you? I'm good. How are you?
Just being creepy. I don't know what he's doing.
It's a lovely day.
Kapai. So that was the brother of Mr. Daly, the Destiny Church preacher who organizes the rallies. And you can see from this flyer that Destiny Church Nelson's brought up, explaining to people why they have been protesting, marching every Saturday. So they've been counter-protesting, at least back at that stage, just as in February last year. They were saying we were protesting every week. So they were going at the exact time, location, as the people who were protesting genocide, as the people who were protesting the murder of their families. What's interesting as well about this post is that a lot of people, a lot of their members weren't very comfortable counter-protesting these people who've lost family members. And they were asking, why can't we join their group? Why can't we march for peace together? We've spoken to them. All they want is a ceasefire. And so they had to release this pamphlet, just repeating very, very, very clear Israeli propaganda. It's like they copy-pasted it from the Israeli Institute, and trying to convince and brainwash their members that actually they're being honorable by marching for genocide. And at the bottom of that, you see they've got these hostages who have become, the face of this genocide defense movement. So Destiny Church has been harassing the anti-genocide protesters for months, and police have enabled them. They've enabled them, and, I believe that they've actually been trying to get a rise out of the anti-genocide protesters, but haven't been able to. Because even in both of those cases where they had arrests, no one did anything. They didn't get attacked. They didn't even come close to it. The only times that we've had violence is against the people protesting against the genocide. And the police enabled that. And that's really important to note, because the police enabling the violence of Destiny against protesters for months and months and months has now enabled Destiny to do what they did to the drag story time at the library. They've had this message from the police all along that they can harass people and nothing will be done to them. And when something was done, like with Daniel Maxwell, they had the likes of the Free Speech Union and all of their friends come down hard on the police. How dare you arrest people on the Israel side? You can only police the people against Israel and the genocide. So, you know, in some ways you can understand that the police is weak on this when they get attacked from groups like the Free Speech Union anytime they do anything. So, you know, it shows how much power these lobby groups have. But then again, we know they are deeply connected with the government. So it's not so much, you know, the distinction between the lobby groups and the government is, it's fluid. There's definitely a massive crossover. You know, they're on phone call basis with the government. So, so all three of those examples supported by the Free Speech Union, and here they are admitting to the fact that they supported all three of those cases.
Look, they outlined 3 examples in their report. Now, if we look at just those 3 examples, those 3 that they chose them themselves. We've got one where they didn't enforce the law effectively at all. The Albert Park protest, where only after much public scrutiny and pressure were there retrospective charges, and no one was actually dealt with on the day, and the police were there, and they acknowledged that their response wasn't adequate. The other 2 examples that they listed were examples of peaceful counter-protest, and our followers will know these stories well, but the stories of Lucy Rogers and Daniel Maxwell, who were arrested in the report sites for their own safety. Now, when police get into the habit of arresting people to keep them safe and not arresting those aggressors who pose a threat, we have to ask the question, what is actually happening out here when it comes to policing protest? Look, they outlined 3.
So they admit to supporting all 3 cases that has now led to the biggest threat to our freedoms of speech that we've seen in our lifetime. But they also say something there that's interesting at the end, where they try and blame the arrests on the anti-genocide protesters. They say, wow, they wanted to arrest they wanted to, what did he say? Let's just play it.
And not arresting those aggressors, a bit of arresting people to keep them safe,
they were arrested
and not arresting those
safe.
aggressors who pose a threat. We have to ask the
and not arresting those who pose a threat. He wants those on the anti-genocide side to be arrested. So not just that they want to protect Daniel Maxwell from being arrested, they actually want the police, if they worry something's going to happen, to arrest the anti-genocide protesters instead. And the Israeli Union also, the Israeli Union may as well be called Israeli Union. The Israeli Institute of New Zealand also ran with this narrative. It's you know, they often run with the same narratives, and they said anti-Israel protesters may have rioted, according to New Zealand police, upon seeing a sign that pointed out their hypocrisy. So the sign holder was arrested. The thugs prevail. So both Free Speech Union and the Israeli Institute are trying to blame the anti-genocide protesters for the arrest of these 2 agitators. But that's incorrect, because the report itself states explicitly the consequent arrest for breach of the peace was unlawful in the case of Lucy Rogers, because there was a very low probability that Miss Rogers' safety was at risk. Okay? So the arrest was unlawful because there was a very low probability of Miss Rogers' safety being at risk. So the anti-genocide protesters posed no risk whatsoever to Lucy Rogers. The police nonetheless decided to arrest her, probably because she's just freaking annoying. And these guys all coming out to say, oh, see, it's the anti-genocide protesters that are the aggressors. It's the anti-genocide protesters that are the thugs.
Who should be arrested.
So unbelievable. The way that they twist these, and it shows you, gives you a little bit of insight as to why those people went in the first place. It's very clear, even in that video, and the way that Lucy Rogers is talking, let them assault me. It's very clear that Daniel Maxwell, Lucy Rogers, both went there to agitate. Lucy was ready to film her arrest. And then they used that with the likes of the Free Speech Union to actually attack our protest rights.
Shame.
And the Free Speech Union, what's their response, of course, to this report? They're celebrating it. Free Speech Union welcomes the IPCA report. And they say there that it vindicates their campaigning. And then I think you read it, and the IPCA reports vindicates those that we have represented. Again, another press release. We told them so. The police admit we were right. And in this one, again, they're celebrating. They say there at the end, with your support, we've not only helped save individuals from abuses, we've also succeeded in a major win through this IPCA report. Side note, Stephen Franks also used to be in the ACT party. So they're celebrating the IPCA report, despite it representing the greatest threat on our freedoms in a long time. And they're happy with the recommendations because they want to destroy our freedom of speech. And they want to take it even further, right? They want to push the envelope further on what protecting free speech means. So far, they've said protecting free speech somehow means this IPCA report that means that they can put any conditions on protests whatsoever. In this interview, they want to expand the definition of thugs veto. So thugs veto, this idea that they shut down people with aggression. And here they want to expand it.
Free Speech Union, I saw called this approach the thugs veto. Can you just explain that? The thugs veto, what does that phrase mean?
Yeah, so the thugs veto, there are different types of ways you can shut down the expression of free speech.
Yeah.
And the thugs veto would be basically through intimidation, through physical intimidation, and through physically trying to stop a person from speaking. There's also the heckler's veto, where people drown out the voices of other people. And these things are commonly employed, More often it's the heckler's veto that you see going on, but the thugs veto is, of course, very concerning. But pretty clearly, if you're...
The heckler's veto. So is that just a normal protest?
I know, right? Like, if we have Christopher Luxon come on stage and he starts announcing that he's going to privatize the country and he's going to rewrite Te Tiriti and he's going to destroy all of our hospitals and he's going to make us a colony of the United States, and we're not allowed to boo him to the point where he's booed off stage, that would be considered a
heckler's veto.
A heckler's veto that we shouldn't be allowed to do in a democracy?
Yeah, so all of a sudden they're saying that making loud sounds at a protest should be illegal. And this reminds me of the discussion that we were having with the Free Speech Union around the Julian Batchelor white supremacist tour. The Free Speech Union, of course, came out in defense of Julian Batchelor's freedom of speech. And they were having arguments with us at the time where they were like, don't you support freedom of speech? And we kept telling them, we support freedom of speech. We want you to support our freedom to protest his ass, all right? So we reserve the right to protest a white supremacist. And actually, it did cross over into a threshold of he was, having a whites-only tour and not letting brown people in. I think that should cross some sort of legal threshold where the police step in and say you can't say no to people on the basis of their skin color or their appearance. But putting that aside for now, let's just say he was having an open racist meeting. We're allowed to stand outside and shout. And he's allowed to have his meeting. He's not allowed to force private venues to host him. He's not allowed to force councils to host him. But if he's got this venue that's agreed to host him, we're allowed to come and stand in a public space and loudly protest that. So this didn't work for them because they wanted to frame us as being anti-free speech, as wanting to cancel his tour, even though we never demanded cancelling his tour. So they've decided to bring in this new idea of a heckler's veto. That would have made our protest against Julian Batchelor illegal because we were trying to make as much noise as possible to disrupt what was happening inside. And of course, that should be protected. And it's reflective of where society is at. Because, for example, if we were to have a Te Tiriti education event, there's no way in hell that the Free Speech Union is going to be able to mobilize hundreds of people across all the small towns in the country to come and counter-protest these events, these Tiriti events. They simply do not have that grassroots support. So they can't do back to us what we do to them. That's again why we say they don't care for the destruction of our protest rights, because that's not the tools that they use. Again, with the heckler's veto, that's what happens when there is a public agreement on an issue where hundreds of people can come out and vocally express their dislike for something, that's actually democracy at work. That is a perfect example of democracy, a perfect example of free speech, all the things that they say that they speak up for. And now they're saying they're going to push for the police to, or for the government to try and stop us from raising our voices in order to disrupt hateful events. We looked far and deep to try and find anywhere where the Free Speech Union outright condemned these anti-protest recommendations. We couldn't find it.
You know, and it's like, oh, you can maybe say that you support some aspects of it, right? But we looked for them calling out that this has aspects of attacks against free speech. They were unwilling. They kind of give slight little, but I mean, this is a 40-minute podcast. They should have come out hard condemning the aspects that limit our free speech. But it's not in there.
It's not in there, and instead they talked about how they were themselves religious, and so they can identify with the views of Destiny Church when they violently tried to invade the drag storytime event at the library. They say, we empathize with their transphobic views, but we just think that they crossed the line. Again, not outright clearly condemning Destiny's Church either. And just to show that there is that relationship between them and Destiny's Church, to the point where they actually came out against the petition to remove Destiny's charitable status.
A petition to remove Destiny's charitable status on the grounds it's not advancing a religious or community purpose by advocating these petitions. What do you think about that idea? Because that would be financially damaging, of course, to Destiny Church for their position.
I think the concern is that people start defining what a church, in this instance, is allowed to be. And if you were to argue that churches can't protest or even have some sort of political element to them in that they might be campaigning on social issues, then we have to completely throw out any lessons learned from people like Martin Luther King. Now, I'm not comparing Brian Tamaki to Martin Luther King, but I would say that it's difficult to make a distinction at that stage because a lot of churches and religious groups have been involved in campaigning for social change. And so if they're going to go and do a protest, are you going to disqualify them, stop them from having charitable status because they've expressed that outrage in a public setting? I think it'd be very difficult to argue that legally.
There is a petition to remove.
So not one person in the whole entire world is arguing that. No one is trying to shut them down just because they have religious views. They're trying to shut them down because they're violent, because they display cult-like behavior, and because their leader, Brian Tamaki, keeps inciting his followers to commit acts of hate and violence. And this is on tape. It's recorded. We have Brian Tamaki coming out and saying, go forth and push your way into that room if you must. We have videos of him espousing extremely Islamophobic, extremely racist, extremely transphobic views. And there are people that are being sent to be indoctrinated by him through police sending people into the Man Up program. There are various issues around this cult leader being given power, and this petition to remove Destiny Church's charitable status is just one example of removing some of the levers of power that Brian Tamaki has. And what's Free Speech Union's response? No, we shouldn't remove their charity status because apparently Brian Tamaki, cult leader inciting violence, having charity status is free speech. So yeah, they just make up anything that they want is free speech, even the destruction of our free speech, right?
Crazy. And they've had to go to the extreme of their hypothetical, right? The very extreme. But that's and they're using a slippery slope argument. But yeah, the fact that they have to go to such an extreme to make their point is that flavor of an Astroturf group, is that flavor of these right-wing think tank lobby groups. They have to go to these extreme, crazy hypotheticals to make their point because their point is so bad, they have to exaggerate everything. It's crazy.
So we've shown you that the IPCA, we've shown you that the Free Speech Union has a big role to play in this IPCA report, having been involved in all 3 cases of the report. We've shown you that they have a relationship with Destiny Church through their defense of Daniel Maxwell, who's Man Up, an agitator of the anti-genocide protesters. And we've shown you that they defend Destiny's Church against the removal of their charity status. So they work with the government, they lobby the government, they lobbied the IPCA, and they got results from it. They also directly work with the police. So this was in the IPCA report. It says, police engaged with the Free Speech Union and updated police policy on policing of demonstrations to include stronger statements related to free speech. This was after the Let Women Speak rally, the Posey Parker transphobic rally, and the counter-protest that happened. Somehow, the Free Speech Union convinced the police to do meetings with them, and for this Free Speech Union, who likes Destiny's Church, who defends the agitators of protesters, are the ones instructing police on their policy. And so my view on this is that the Free Speech Union has been, for a long time, pushing the police to leave these agitators alone so that they can incite violence, so that then they can justify anti-protest laws. And so when they say that they updated police policy to include stronger statements related to free speech, you know that that won't be on defending the free speech of the anti-genocide protesters, for example, right? These guys are very strongly Zionist. They've made that very clear. They would have helped them to draft new policies so that they allow people like Destiny's Church to harass us protesters. As well as working with the police, they also work directly with the government. We've seen this before. The Free Speech Union gave a call to Paul Goldsmith suggesting Melissa Derby to be the Race Relations Commissioner. And Melissa Derby also happens to be one of the people that was included, that was in that transphobic Speak Up for Women event that they were trying to have at Massey, that was spoken of in that documentary earlier, the Alice Snedden one. So she's one of the Speak Up for Women transphobe speakers who wanted to have their transphobic event on the Transgender Day of Visibility. She's now our race commissioner, and she is the Race Relations Commissioner because the Free Speech Union gave a phone call to Paul Goldsmith and said, hey, can you put the Zionist Stephen Rainbow as the Human Rights Commissioner? We've already talked about that before, and how problematic that individual is. And they also pushed for Melissa Derby, a transphobe, to be, and a racist, by the way. So she aligns with all of those folks, the Hobson's Pledge, the Taxpayers Union, all of that. She shares their views against Te Tiriti o Waitangi, and she also shares their views on transphobia. You'll notice there is a pattern. They have picked their targets. Their targets are Māori and trans people. And you can see all of these groups, the ACT Party, the Free Speech Union, the Speak Up for Women, and so on and so forth. They will continually attack these two groups. They've picked them as the targets of our culture war in order to avoid a class war, and also to literally outlaw protests, also to avoid a class war. So yeah, it feeds into their objectives in numerous ways. It divides us from each other. It kills our protest movement. Also, another quick example of them just having a relationship with the government. They tweeted about this, how they wrote a letter to Simeon Brown. That's this letter here. You can see it's addressed to Simeon Brown and David Seymour, complaining that there are new, basically new guidelines within various sectors of our health industries in New Zealand, saying that people should respect people's cultures. Extremely basic recommendations. You can see them here. basically asking people to analyze their personal biases, you know, like things like, for a long time now, a lot of people, unfortunately, health professionals, have been indoctrinated with racist myths. For example, Black people experience less pain. These are still prevalent in our health industry. So they're having to put out guidelines to be like, look, we just need to be aware that we might have pre-existing biases because racism and colonialism is a real thing.
And like an example of that, it was posted by someone, I can't remember, but talked about how on average Māori are prescribed less pain medication than non-Māori. And the theory behind that was, as Samah said, there's this racist notion that, of course, because Black people or Māori or Indigenous people are more like animals, you know, they're the warrior race, they're strong, they don't need pain relief. That racism and indoctrination is inside of us. Unfortunately, our healthcare professionals, which leads them to giving less referrals, less medications, less referrals, worse off treatment because of these ingrained biases that we have. And this is like a really cheap, sad way to address the health inequities in our system of Māori dying so much younger than non-Māori.
Because the government isn't doing it. So these groups like the Pharmacy Council, the Dental Council, and the Nursing Council, they're doing whatever they can within their power as a sub-government body. Because if we don't have the government addressing these issues at their root causes, this is the best that these guys can do. It just directs people, for example, telling them to understand the impacts of racism, colonization, and power imbalance on Māori oral health. This is from the Dental Council. Okay, so the Free Speech Union's angry about this. How dare you consider racism? They want to maintain the inequality that exists between Māori and non-Māori. So they write to Simeon Brown. And of course, Simeon Brown does whatever his masters say, right? And so he writes back. He tells them off. Oh, Kiwis expect this. Kiwis back. Don't speak for us, okay? I'm a Kiwi too. And I expect that our professional bodies are aware of their racism and the impacts of colonization. But that's what they do, right? Kiwis think this because they're putting us in the other camp. They're trying to otherize us. And he says, I'll be writing to the Pharmacy Council. Okay, so the Free Speech Union farts, and now a minister of the government is directing the Pharmacy Council of how they should be organizing their body. Remember, this is the government that got elected on a campaign of devolution and localism. And since they've been in government, everything that they've done is them bossing around local governance and local bodies and centralizing power.
It's a classic colonial method, right? They call English the language of the forked tongue, right? The language of the forked tongue. And it's clear as well in the names that these Astroturf groups choose. They often mean the exact opposite of what you would think that they mean. And we see it all throughout, not just, you know, what you're saying in terms of nationals speak around devolution. Of course, now they're talking about privatization. The lunch program, you know, used to be run by all local groups, but now they've centralized it. So, you know, they speak with a forked tongue in opposites. It's very deceptive. And as we can see, it seems to work. They're able to get MPs to act on their behalf because of the language that they use. They purport to be, you know, speaking on behalf of the people. They're a union. But it's all just a smokescreen. And the reason why we say that, you know, the guys who created these groups, Jordan Williams creating the Taxpayers Union and the Free Speech Union, even, we didn't talk about it, but the New Zealand, the Israel Institute of New Zealand also has links with the Free Speech Union.
Oh, yeah.
David Cumin. And, you know, David Cumin has tried to block academic free speech on all sorts of academics who have been speaking up for Palestine. He is a member of the Free Speech Union. And the Free Speech Union and David Cumin, you know, they've had to come out a few times and say, oh, no, he meant this, or oh, he did apologize for this, but they don't emphatically call it out. He's still a part of the Free Speech Union, right? This guy who's now
Oh, yeah.
infamous for blocking the free speech of academics who speak up about Palestine. He tries to get them removed from their positions. So based on their speech, he's trying to dox them, get them fired. But yeah, all of these groups are connected. It's painful.
It is, and it's frustrating because they do all these actions that clearly show they're against free speech, right? I mean, even this is against the freedom of the Pharmacy Council to do and say whatever they want, right? Anyway, everything they do, attacking free speech left, right, and center, whether it's David Cuman of the attacking the anti-genocide professors, or whether it's them complaining to the IPCA that we need more restrictions on our freedoms, the media takes them at face value time and time again. And again, with that whole, you know, how they represented the Speak Up for Women as a normal, rational, respectable group, they consistently represent the Free Speech Union as such, when every day they're saying something racist, every day they're saying something transphobic, every day they're trying to limit free speech. They don't include any of that. They're happy to just go with their name. So simple. It's such a simple game they play, isn't it? They're happy to just print their name or repeat their name on the news and say, the Free Speech Union says this. And the public, having not done their research on this group, they have no reason not to believe that this group really is a union aimed at protecting our freedom of speech. So the media has a role to play here, because they're not just meant to take anything for granted, right? These, you know, just because you call yourself a group, just because your name says something, doesn't mean that that's what you do. And it's their job to tell us objective reality.
Shame on you, Free Speech Union. We see you. We know what you're doing. And I suspect onto it people in Aotearoa know what's going on here as well. It's only a matter of time until the media figures out. But of course, you know, they've got their people on the inside of the media. They've got their people everywhere. So, you know, it's a bit of a challenge to us, to all of us, I guess. We have to wisen up and make our positions clear on these groups like the Free Speech Union. And potentially have to make our own. The real Free Speech Union. But, you know, free speech, and, you know, it's a leftist issue at its heart, free speech. The ability to speak against power and to have your ability to do that protected. You know, that's what free speech is really about. But it's been co-opted by the right, by the fascists, by the extremists on their end of the spectrum, so that they're allowed to be protected to say hateful things which cause real harm in our communities. There was that article talking about hatred, violence against the trans community. There was an article about that recently. And, you know, when you spread hate speech, it becomes the reality. The thing that comes after hate speech is physical violence. We do need to find ways to protect people from those types of things.
And they want to protect their hate speech, but B, as we've found now through looking at the IPCA report, they want to then use those examples and the tension they cause to campaign and push for restrictions of our free speech. And I believe that that's a Free Speech Union's ultimate goal, is to restrict our free speech. So, you know, that same strategy that that woman on the Alice Sneddon's documentary said, that they just want to get a rise out of us so that they can attack us with that. I believe that they have that general strategy against protests. And so the hate speech thing, like, you know, I feel like a lot of people have seen that aspect of it, what you just said, that they're weaponizing free speech to spread hate speech. But there's another part to that story, which is then they weaponize that hate speech to incite a response from protesters that they then use to justify shutting down protests. And so that's what I believe is the sinister goal of the Free Speech Union.
Shame. All right, we'll change tax a little bit.
Tact?
We'll change. Well, tax. It was my attempt at a bit of a pun there. Changing tax. Going to talk about the Taxpayers Union. So the Taxpayers Union is another one of these Astroturf groups made by Jordan Williams. Here is a really great article here by Ruth Hill. It's an RNZ article, and in this article they explain astroturfs. Okay, so astroturf. What is astroturf? Right, it's the fake grass that they have at like soccer pitches and stuff like that. Right, astroturf, fake grass. We call them an astroturf group because of, you know, grassroots movements. Grassroots movements is about, ironically, also another astroturf group, groundswell. Grassroots movements are about people power, a grassroots movement of people growing from the bottom rather than a top-down approach. And so an astroturf group is a fake grassroots group because what they try to do is they try to appear like they have real world people's opinions and concerns. And in this article, it's a fantastic article. If you want to learn about astroturf groups and what they've done, I highly recommend. An insider, I think it's a former ACT Party researcher. He gave some insights into how these astroturf groups work. And here, this is how he puts it. They would create these astroturfs that would break new ground, and they, ACT, would appeal to the ground that was broken. So you have this group like the Free Speech Union, who campaigns, you know, they have money, right? They make petitions, they make all sorts of promotional material, they'll run a few events. Hopefully they'll call a few of their politician friends, you know, drum up some media, then get in the media to make it appear like there is some type of something going on, you know, and then probably David Seymour is going to come in and have a comment about it. And
it was that example we just looked at with the Pharmacy Council is a perfect example. The Free Speech Union complains, makes some tweets, writes a letter, pretends like society is annoyed that the Pharmacy Council is looking at racism when there is no such real concern in the real world. This is a completely top-down issue. It's an issue that aligns ideologically with this government. And so, but they're pretending like the grassroots is complaining about it so that Simeon Brown can do what he already wanted to do, which is to come after every Maori thing in existence and every anti-racism thing in existence. But now he can say, I'm doing it because the Free Speech Union complained.
Exactly. And while I was researching the Taxpayers Union, here's just an example of how sometimes the media gets things wrong and then, you know, overconflates the size of these groups and their influence. Here, Guy and Espina, maybe he's not the one to blame, but they claim that the Taxpayers Union has 200,000 members. 200,000 members, and as such is one of the largest lobby groups in New Zealand. But then if you go on the taxpayers website, so it's not really the taxpayers' fault, it's RNZ's fault. They have 200,000 registered members and supporters.
Oh.
So supporters, what does that mean? It could mean subscribers on YouTube, people who are signed up to their newsletter, things like that. The Taxpayers Union membership is apparently $25 a year, so 200,000 members at $25 a year is like $5 million. So I doubt that that is the case, but even so, how many members do they have? I think if you know, I don't think they give the exact numbers, but they claim to have 21,000 people who have donated to them. They're a powerful group.
But no
that is for
transparency,
sure.
right?
It's not no way. They claim that they're transparency on this website. They kind of give some breakdowns here and there, but they don't actually mention the full amount that they have received in donations. And that's the benefit of these AstroTurf groups, is that they're able to take donations from people, any amount, and they're not held to the same criteria as a political party who would need to disclose large donations. The Taxpayers Union and other AstroTurf groups, they might lobby for a political party's goal, and if you're a corporation who's wanting that political agenda, you'll donate to the Taxpayers Union rather than donating to the political party that's actually going to be the one to implement the policy change. And then you don't have to declare conflicts of interest, you don't have to declare, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the Taxpayers Union, this is from 2019. It was found that they're backed by tobacco giants.
Of course they are.
Of course they are. But of course, they're not under any kind of obligation to tell us the details of that, to tell us how much money it is. And so, okay, so the Taxpayers Union, they've been around for quite a long time. They're backed by tobacco companies, and they've been advocating for tax cuts for the tobacco industry for a long time. Now, just to show us the strength of these lobby groups and how influential they are, I'm going to talk a little bit about Casey Costello. Casey Costello, she's number 3 on the New Zealand First list.
Wow.
She's fresh to politics. She's brand new to politics, and they've given her the number 3 slot. Why was she given the number 3 slot? Why is she so powerful? Well, she is a founding member of Hobson's Pledge. And she was also the chair of the Taxpayers Union before she became a New Zealand First member. And like I said, the Taxpayers Union is funded by Big Tobacco and have been campaigning on tax cuts for the tobacco industry. What does Casey Costello do? One of the first things she does when she gets into office, a mysterious document lands on Casey Costello's desk, but she can't tell us where it's come from. And in this document, it's clearly written by tobacco lobbyists. Probably the most famous thing in this document that's been cited is apparently it says within it that nicotine is no more dangerous than caffeine.
I remember that.
Yeah. And, you know, there were OIAs that were put through. Casey Costello was deemed to be acting contrary to law, I believe is what the chief ombudsman said, because she said this document didn't exist originally.
So what happened then? What's her punishment?
Punishment? I don't know. She had to apologize?
Okay.
Right? I mean, this is New Zealand First, doing what they want their ministers to do. She's not going to be reprimanded.
Just interesting how nothing sticks to these people, right? Like when a Labour or a Greens or Te Pāti Māori minister does something, the media will forever and a day identify them with that thing that they did. But it's like we've moved on from this, even though she was outright lying and working for the tobacco lobby.
She's just been silent. And I can't believe that this has kind of just been glossed over. Shane Reti, he took the brunt of the hit, Minister of Health at the time, Shane Reti, for rolling back smoke-free legislation. Casey Costello supported him through that as the Associate Health Minister.
Associate Health Minister.
Yeah. And so one of the things she did, you know, this document, it advocated for a tax cut, a 50% tax cut on heated tobacco products. And this is what she put through as Associate Health Minister. Casey Costello. Naughty, naughty, naughty. And so why did they do this? Why did they do this? Well, Taxpayers Union has been wanting this for a long time. And now, because of the strength of these lobby groups of Hobson's Pledge and of the Taxpayers Union, she's been able to be put in a position where she's finally been able to bring this Taxpayers Union desire to fruition, which speaks, I believe, to the power of these lobby groups.
They've been campaigning for like 8 years for this tax.
A long time. And it's an interesting connection. You know, there's all of these connections between Taxpayers Union, Free Speech Union, National Party, ACT Party, etc., etc., etc. But now we have a interesting crossover with New Zealand First thrown into the mix, which I'm glad, because they're fascists as well. They're all sorts of awful words that we should call them. It's good to see them crossing over into this space so that people can see the truth in terms of New Zealand First, in terms of the values that they have. They're not a party for Māori. I mean, it's hilarious as well. Casey Costello, again, she is also Māori. The 3 ministers of New Zealand First, the 3 top ministers of New Zealand First have whakapapa Māori, which is
that's part of the shtick.
That's part of the Astroturf.
I was going to say that. They follow the logic of the Astroturf, which is to pretend to speak on behalf of a certain group of people while actually working against them, Well, what better way to do that than to have 3 Māori ministers working against Māori interests while using their identity as an astroturf?
Exactly. Okay, so Casey Costello, shame on you. She has been slammed for it. A very prominent nutrition expert came out, but she should be slammed more. I don't know why she's still in her portfolio. Health professionals have been saying that her advice is completely contrary to the evidence, and that she's acting more like a minister of tobacco rather than a health minister. So shame on you, Casey Costello. And how does New Zealand First feel about the tobacco industry? Well, here's a video of Winston Peters smoking at a campus outside a no smoking sign. Old Winston Peters. And of course, Winston Peters, New Zealand First, they have also campaigned for tax cuts for the tobacco industry. And of course, we've seen Winston Peters and Shane Jones, especially recently, come out against the use of the word Aotearoa, which is, of course, a Hobson's Pledge campaign, of course. So, interesting.
So New Zealand First is like Hobson's Pledge, and ACT and National are like Taxpayers Union, Free Speech Union.
Yep. And to throw into the shitbag of New Zealand First is, of course, right, Julian Batchelor.
Oh, of course, yes. And they're into the whole transphobia stuff as well. They're pushing for the reforms on bathrooms and all sorts of things.
Exactly. So thank you, Costello. That's probably enough of her. Back to the Taxpayers Union. So why do we hate the Taxpayers Union so much? Right? What's wrong with the Taxpayers Union?
Racist.
The Taxpayers Union, what do? They're meant to be pointing out wasteful spending. That's what they say, that they're an organization that really cares about our taxpayer dollars, right? So the reason why we have a issue with the Taxpayers Union is it's very telling what types of things they focus on. The reason why we know they're a group of racists is because of what they focus on. And one of the more recent things that they've focused on, if this page decides to load, every year they do what's called the Jonesy Awards, right? Where they highlight, from their opinion, where the most wasteful spending has been. Okay? So let's watch this video. This is the group that won, this is their nomination that won the award for worst central government spending. Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, our first nomination is Dr. Aisha Verrill for approving $4 million of taxpayer money to cure Kauri dieback with whale song. You heard that right. After hearing the folklore story of how the whale and the Kauri used to be brothers, and concluding the reason for Kauri dieback must be a symptom of their tragic separation, Verrill trusted Landcare Research to bring the two together and cure the Kauri from dieback by playing whale song. But don't take my word for it. Let's hear from the experts.
This is long, by the way,
and myself, and I guess my specific role in this project is to really enable and assist Matua Tohe to undertake the research and the mahi that he does in the rongoa space, which is to look at how we might combat against the pathogen which is affecting our kauri trees. Its purpose is quite simple, and it is about restoring the well-being of the kauri.
But it's not necessarily, I guess, research per se of our mātauranga Māori for this much debate, i.e. mātauranga and science. To get behind our mātauranga, we need to raise its profile. Looking at the notion of i-rangaranga, vibrational frequencies, things like karakia, in order to be a part of the rongoa, the healing process. This is a kaupapa that we need to discuss as a go-to form of knowledge, particularly when dealing with issues and kaupapa here in Aotearoa.
highly edited what he said.
Oh, of course.
I mean, it just reminds me of something someone recently said. One of these transphobic groups made a hideous AI image depicting the trans and trans allies as looking scary, horrific, whatever caricature they had, I can't remember. It was ugly. And someone raised the point that they needed to make us look worse than we do to make their points.
Right.
For them to incite as much hate as they do in people's hearts, they need to lie about us. They need to depict us as monsters. They can't just show a picture of the really lovely, peaceful trans solidarity rally, right? It doesn't suit them. And likewise with this, they can't just play a clip of him saying a full sentence that makes logical, rational sense because they want to make it sound irrational.
Exactly. Oh man, there's so much to say about this video. They're playing off the energy that there is this gravy train, this government gravy train that Māori are riding. So they're complaining about $4 million, okay? A $4 million spend. What they don't say is that that $4 million was actually stretched over the course of 5 years, okay? So, I mean, that's just one of the things they don't say. But not only that, just a bit of a context around what has preceded this. This is feeding off of the energy where academics, racist academics, were saying dumb shit about Mātauranga Māori. To the point where Richard Dawkins came over to Aotearoa and he jumped on the Māori hating train. During that time, the Free Speech Union put out a survey. And that survey was run by Curia Market Research, the dodgy polling company run by David Farrar, the company who has had breaches against it. In fact, this survey that they put out, RANDS, the Standards Authority, deemed that the questions in the survey were dodgy and they didn't allow for unbiased responses. I remember when that survey came out and freshwater ecologist Mike Joy, he was facing censorship at the universities because, of course, universities, are primarily funded by the agricultural sector, by our primary industries. And one of the main things that they, study at universities is just the dairy industry. And, of course, he was looking at research of how we can have clean waterways, which is kind of the opposite of what our primary industries, especially our dairy industry, is interested in, because polluting our waterways is something that they require. The externalization of harm to our waterways is a part of their model that requires them to be maintained so that they can maintain their profit. Anyway, so there's this energy and this desire to try and dismiss Mātauranga Māori. One of the reasons why they're trying to dismiss Mātauranga Māori is because decolonization is happening. We're starting to realize that there are values into indigenous ways of being. And this is one of my big things that I believe in, is that indigenous ways of living hold the key to a lot of our modern day solutions. A lot of our modern day solutions that have been created through shonky, Western science. And they're unable to let go of their supremacy. It's just the classic unable to share power. And when it comes to science and which projects get funded, they're unable to let go of their share of the funding pool for their scientific endeavors. Now that funding is being made available for Mātauranga Māori, you see a lot of mainstream people in the science space coming out against that. Because if Mātauranga Māori is going to be funded, then that's opening up a whole new realm of competitors that these people will have to compete against for them to receive their funding for their initiatives.
A competition of ideas, which is what they're always promoting.
Right.
But in reality, it's just another projection. They want to protect and control the supremacy of their ideologies, and they don't want to allow any other worldviews to enter in case it might help us, the public, to think in a different way.
And just back to what the Taxpayers Union is complaining about, right? So it's $4 million stretched over 5 years, and they've framed it as money that's just going to subsidize whale oil or whale song, or whale potions, they say, and whale songs. But if you look into the funding of this program, the rongoā solutions for Cody dieback disease, and that's what this is about, by the way. They're looking for solutions to Cody dieback disease. And in terms of the rongoā, which is the whale potions that they're referring to, only 20% of that budget went into that aspect, okay? And in terms of playing whale songs, whale music, only 13% of the budget went to that aspect of it. 35% of the budget, the biggest chunk of the budget, actually went into seed banks, seed sovereignty, which is of course a awesome kaupapa. And in the scheme of us potentially changing our GE laws, you know, seed sovereignty and seed banking is an incredibly important thing for us to do. And I think the reason why this probably received the most of the funding is probably because it involved more people. They would have had to have a lot more workers, people handling and dealing with the seeds. Okay, so you might still be thinking, oh, well, even though those aspects didn't receive the bulk of the funding, it still sounds a little bit weird. And of course, that's how they've framed it. They want it to sound weird. They want it to sound alien. You know, they want it to sound cavemanish, you know? That's the whole idea. Demonize mātauranga Māori, frame it as something airy-fairy, hocusy-pocusy, dancing around the fire, singing songs to trees that don't have ears. That's how they want to talk about it. That's how they want to frame it. However, and it's funny, the website, the people who put all this together, they've actually received pushback from the public, and I'm assuming it's because of the Taxpayers Union and their Jonesies thing. The people running this website, they had to come and defend themselves. They've put this disclaimer at the start of their website, and you know, they say, "We are disappointed but not surprised about the disingenuous and malicious framing of this work as whale potions and whale songs." And so, you know, they're used to this, you know.
And they say they've been through peer review and based on the same scientific standards that any other program that applies for funding does.
Exactly. And it's hilarious. They've said here, in light of the interest we have seen on here, we are boldly offering whale potion and whale song t-shirts for sale. So they've turned it into a bit of a ha-ha.
Can we have a look at them?
Good on. Oh, I actually clicked on it because I ordered us 2 t-shirts.
Did you really?
They don't have a
picture?
A design yet. I think they're just trying to gauge the interest. Maybe it's not for real. Maybe we're not actually going to get our t-shirts, but oh well. And so anyway, a little bit about the program itself. Okay, so you know, Cody dieback is a serious disease here in Aotearoa that's affecting our Cody trees, and of course we've had decades of, you know, non-mātauranga Māori solutions that have been funded and have been researched and advanced that haven't worked. And so it makes sense to then broaden our perspectives and try and look elsewhere. And, you know, another reason why it's bad that the Taxpayers Union has focused on this report is that the outcomes of the analysis and the studies have not come out yet. So they don't even know if things have worked. And one of the main researchers, one of the main tohunga of this kaupapa here, he came and visited us here, and we asked him if the application of this rongoā, which involves crushed up whale bone and whale oil, along with other things, he told us that literally every case study, every specimen, every tree that they have applied this rongoā to is improving. Every tree that it's been applied to is improving. So I am anxiously waiting to see the results of this so that the Taxpayers Union can eat their own words. But, you know, there's nothing weird or airy-fairy about this. A lot of this a lot of the criticism around this is that there is a kōrero tuku iho, a pūrākau, about the relationship between whales and the Cody trees. And that's a really interesting thing, that we have this old kind of story connecting these two. And so a lot of our old people have said, oh, you know, there is this story that I recall about the connection between Cody trees and whales. So let's experiment with some solutions. You know, that hint that there is a connection is thanks to Mātauranga Māori. Not only is it seemingly working, but this isn't the only thing that has been tried within this space. On this website, they talk about kānuka, which is a relative of mānuka. Everyone will know mānuka. Kānuka, the roots of kānuka, produce a certain chemical that stops the spread of the spores that spread Cody dieback disease.
Wow.
So there is already a known rongoā that can be applied to stop the spread of Cody dieback, you know. But the Taxpayers Union would probably be like, oh, you're making root potions. Blah. There's already solid science.
Through Mātauranga Māori.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's already solid examples of using natural remedies. You know, they'd probably call it some kind of weird green thingy. It's like it has to come from a lab to please these guys. But it's funny because this funding was also used to create a lab at Aotearoa Marae in Moerewa. Through this funding, they're able to create a lab. And so they can actually measure things in the way that you would expect through a lab. And, you know, so what's happening there is they're building capacity. They're upskilling our people. They're building capacity for our people to be able to run more studies like this. And that's what these people don't want. They don't want labs being installed at our marae. They don't want our people building capacity, relying on natural remedies, strengthening ourselves with our own knowledge. They want us relying on their systems. Another thing about this whole project is that they looked into solutions to myrtle rust. And of course, the Taxpayers Union didn't mention that. Myrtle rust is said to potentially risk between 100 million and 1 billion of our GDP if it's not dealt with. Myrtle rust can impact the Fijoa industry, and also, of course, this will be a big one for a lot of people, the Manuka honey industry. So it's good for our economy, I suppose, for this to be pursued.
Of course.
Only a fraction was spent on the thing that they actually criticized, and of course, it's actually real solid science. But because it's Māori related, they see it as a threat.
So it's only 40% of the 4 million, and it's over 5 years. So if you were to divide that 40% of 4 million over each year, the amount will be a fraction of that 4 million. But they chose that, and correct me if I'm wrong here, they chose this 40% of 4 million for rongoā solution as their number one waste of taxpayer money?
From central government funding, yeah, they had a
number one.
Yeah.
And they spend hundreds of billions?
The government?
The government spends billions and billions, and they chose it as their number one. Someone pointed out in the comments the treaty submission bill is estimated to cost around 4 million. And that's not for 4 years, that's for like 6 months.
Exactly. And that was a conservative estimate from the Council of Trade Unions, I think. They said they're like pretty sure a conservative estimate of 4 million, but could be up to 6 million. So, you know, it's a bill that has been dead since the signing of the coalition agreement. And, you know, there's so much bullshit to pull up about the Treaty Principles Bill process, right? I mean, the fast track process, how quickly they sped that through and how quickly they made the select committee process for that. But they made the choice to drag out the select committee process to 6 months, which, you know, it's bad because it's taking up all the oxygen and it's distracting us all from other various issues. But I think it's, as Aaron Hawkins said, it's totally backfired because now we have this just incredible resource of so many people giving their thoughts. I really don't think it's as the ACT Party anticipated it would be. It's been absolutely amazing. But yeah, of course, that's not what they anticipated. That's not what their intention was. They can't now turn around and say, "Oh, it was a great spend of $4 million because we had this big discussion." It's as Aaron Hawkins said in his submission, that it's been done with the maximum harm being the intention of their process. So no matter what good has come from it, the intention of the government through spending that $4 million was to attack the core of Te Ao Māori, the central po that we believe our rights come from. And for the government to do that, to attack that central po, is going to set us back generations in terms of trust that Te Iwi Māori has for the government. For me personally, knowing that such a thing can be put through like that, such a traumatizing thing, and us having to relive all of that, all of the people who did treaty submissions with near tears in their eyes, and the fact that we have to come out and defend ourselves in that way, you know, it's outrageous. And in this Jonesy Award run by the Taxpayers Union, of course, they didn't even once mention the treaty principles bill. Not even a humble little honorary mention.
And that's not just because of our ideological position, but because it's just clearly a waste of money, because it's the bill that's not going to go through to second reading. It's a dead bill, and they're pushing it through select committee anyway. But I think you nailed it. If I could just, I think you nailed it. It's this first line here. The Oranga program was created in direct response to government to explore how Māori knowledge and practices could contribute to ongoing research. That's what the Free Speech Union is attacking here. They're attacking that growth of Māori capacity to contribute to ongoing scientific research in this country. That's what they're so mad about.
And other things on the website, you know, there were two plans that were put together. How do we address Cody dieback and how do we address myrtle rust? And in both of those reports, they both advocated that 25% of total research investment be invested in Mātauranga Māori-led research, because they knew the value. They understood the value. Not only that, but in one of the reports here, it was stipulated that the funding and the program needed to be led by those who were being impacted on the ground. So local hapu, people who work with Cody trees, people who are impacted by the myrtle rust. These initiatives had to have them at the core of the delivery of the program. So of course, like you say, it's initiatives, money, it's capacity going out to our people. It's money going out to our people, those who are impacted the most. You know, it sounds like a great direction for us to go. And in terms of this aspect here of them saying that 25% should go to investment in Mātauranga Māori-led research, it's a great way of wording it. I think probably in some lazy reports or clumsily worded reports, it may have just said Māori-led research, but this is Mātauranga Māori-led. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it has to come from someone who is Māori. Mātauranga Māori-led research. So, you know, this isn't a race-based type of initiative. This is talking about our culture, Mātauranga Māori, which of course can be practiced by anyone. So, good job on the wording on that one. But yeah, of course, like I said, you know, there are promising results so far of this treatment. It's an incredible thing. And another aspect that they talked about was whale songs, right? Whale songs being played. And they really made fun of this one, and they tried to make it sound stupid. But it's called soundscaping. And it's been used on coral reefs. Soundscaping has been used on coral reefs. If you record a healthy reef ecosystem, it makes various sounds. You know, you can understand all the various critters that would exist in a healthy ecosystem. They make noises. Researchers have recorded that sound of a healthy coral reef ecosystem, and then they have played that sound to a dying reef. And they have found that more animals, microinvertebrates and everything start to return to that ecosystem to then start recontributing and rebuilding that ecosystem. But this is the first time that that way of thinking and that research is being applied in this way to a forest ecosystem. So there's precedent for it working in our oceans, using soundscape technology to heal coral reefs. So, you know, it's not completely unprecedented. There is science, real science, to back up those coral reef projects. And now, you know, it's classic, beautiful Aotearoa Kiwi innovation. It is a world first. And there's precedents for it working in other ecosystems. So for the Taxpayers Union to come out and denigrate it in that way, it shows the racism. It shows the racism inherent within them and what they are trying to reinforce in everyone. And, you know, it's just like a hunter. You know, I guess the Taxpayers Union don't know any hunters or anything, right? Like the idea of playing a sound or doing a call, like you can imagine like a duck call or a deer call, attracting an animal to your vicinity using sound. I mean, the fact that they think that that's like witchcraft is just outrageous.
It shows their lack of knowledge on how interconnected our ecosystems are, right? And it's kind of reflective of their colonial worldview anyway, wherein they put everything in their strict, neatly defined binaries, whether it's man and woman or, you know, a Kodi tree and a whale, and they just cannot, in their mind, understand how all of these things interrelate and interconnect and have this reliance on one another, you know? So the change in the amount of whales in the sea will impact our forests. They just cannot, and their colonial brains cannot grasp that.
What a shame. So the point is that what they're criticizing is actually an incredible piece of innovative science, which is also kind of, it's not trickling down to our communities. It's been inserted directly to benefit our communities, to run these programs, to benefit from the infrastructure that it's going to create. The scientific thinking and participation in these activities is building capacity amongst our people. And Indigenous knowledge, Indigenous thinking, Indigenous worldviews are starting to gain a level of respect. They're gaining traction in the field of, you know, for lack of a better phrase, Western science. And that space is a space that Indigenous thinkers, Indigenous solutions have been trying to penetrate for an incredibly long time. So we're making great ground in that space. And so I expect them to push back on this one more. And I'm looking forward to the kind of weird excuses they come up with when we discover that this solution is actually working. Very excited for that. So what are some other things that they could be criticizing, right? Here I say they're criticizing something they shouldn't. They're criticizing something that is great and it's working. Something that, you know, I don't want to unnecessarily shit on someone's work, but when we were looking for other examples of things that we thought they might criticize, we came up with...
We were looking at examples that received funding for scientific projects around the same time. And look at this recent one. This one they announced, and this one's more than, this one's 12.4 million.
And it's probably over like a shorter time frame as well, but anyway.
So the other one, they're attacking the Mātauranga Māori one for spending 40% of 4 million over 4 years, and this one over 5 years. And this one, if they wanted to attack a waste of money of a scientific project, what about this one? 12.4 million for 1 year.
For woke concrete.
I actually don't know if it's for 1 year. I'm gonna pause on that. I don't know how long it's for. But they received this fund, 12.4 million, to do this woke concrete. Why is it woke? Because they want to lower emissions with this concrete. How do they want to lower emissions? Instead of using the current materials, limestone, to make concrete, they want to make it out of iron. And they say that that's better because limestone needs to be heated, which uses fossil fuels, whereas the iron does not need to be heated. But of course, it comes with its own environmental issues, such as you have to mine the iron, and that will have its own environmental problems. And they also saying that they want to have this concrete sucking CO2 from the atmosphere. So these are magical.
Never mind trees. Never mind trees. Let's just dig up some iron.
It's ridiculous, right? Because we know that that's what trees do. But, you know, we're reaching a point where they're going to say planting trees is some crazy mātauranga hippie nonsense, whereas these CO2 sequestering concrete roads are the way to go, right? That's how they're going to spin it. And we know that these are we know that this is magical thinking. They're not going to be able to sequester enough CO2 from the atmosphere to prevent climate change. What we need to do is just to stop emitting CO2. It's the simplest thing in the world. What are you doing? You're emitting CO2. What do you do to stop it? Stop emitting CO2. And we can do that. We can do that actually overnight if we just ended our animal agriculture industry. Kept doing transport, we would still be cutting the vast majority of our CO2. Obviously, we can't do it overnight. But we can be working towards eliminating or reducing our CO2.
We can reduce a huge chunk. We can't get rid of CO2 that quickly, of course, because it has its weird cumulative effect. A lot of it's going to be stuck with us for a long time. But, you know, the reason why we need to get rid of animal agriculture so quickly is because that's where a lot of the short-lived gases are, like methane and nitrous oxide. If we can get rid of those short-term gases, which can be done in a very short time frame, then it's going to give us more time to handle those harder, more persistent greenhouse gases like CO2. Because methane and nitrous oxide, two of the main gases from animal agriculture, they are pushing us over the limit currently. And once we get pushed over a particular limit of warming, we're going to lose the ice caps, there's going to be more melting, et cetera, and that's going to push us over. But if we can get rid of those short-term gases as fast as possible, we can prevent those tipping points being met so that we can have a much longer period to get rid of those persistent greenhouse gas emissions. Tangent.
Sorry, yeah. What I was trying to say is that we can, because in this woke concrete project, they say that they're trying to get to the target of net zero emissions by 2050. What I was trying to say is that we can reach our target of net zero emissions if we just, even if we just stopped exporting animal products and only created animal products for people in Aotearoa to consume. That's only 10% of all of our animal agriculture industry. So we could reach those goals by cutting our emissions. But of course, they don't want to. They support the industry, they support the profits. And so what they're trying to do is come up with all these magical tools to suck out the emissions from the sky. And you look at how much they want to do, it's like very small amount. It's not going to be consequential anyway.
Yeah, and one of the reasons why I call it woke concrete is, you know, what is my definition of woke? It's like when you do something that you think is going to solve a problem, but really it's just kind of virtue signaling. That's kind of my position on woke. And so I call it woke concrete because, you know, you look at the manufacturing and construction aspect of this graph. Manufacturing and construction on the left there takes up 7.8% of our emissions. And I assume that's where emissions are coming from in terms of concrete production. And you look at the other side, agriculture, 53.2% of our greenhouse gas emissions. But you know, like I said at the beginning, I don't want to unnecessarily shit on people's mahi. I mean, we do use concrete, so, you know, we do need to be looking into solutions in that space. But from the Taxpayers Union perspective, I expected them, or New Zealand First, or some other group, to come out calling it woke concrete, because it's really not going to solve the issues that they're trying to solve.
And it's experimental. So it's, you know, if they have issues with experimental science, like the Cody dieback research, but they don't take issue with this experimental. We don't know that this concrete is going to work at all, by the way. And they're going to have to do long-term tests because they want to know if it can withstand weather conditions in different countries, if it can be, because they will only take on this new concrete if it can be mass-produced and supplied to, you know, the world over. So that means they need to test it, and they need to test it over many years' time, and they need to see if it can handle the daily use. And by the way, the research is over 5 years, so just to correct us from before as
Ah,
well.
got
So
my
it's-
good sleuthing. Good job.
Yeah, so it's this $10 million over 5 years for that concrete project, almost
Kapai.
11 million. Still more than
Still
the other
more
one.
than the Rongoa project. Kapai,
Still experimental and still magical thinking because it will not resolve climate change. But Taxpayers Union has no issue with it because it's not Maori.
Yeah,
So
and of course it didn't get a mention. Okay, so that's just one of the examples we looked at in terms of recent examples, but here are some of the other things that we believe the Taxpayers Union should be talking about, and this is why we say that they're an Astroturf group. They say that they are advocating on behalf of taxpayers. They say they are looking into wasteful government spending, or they are trying to call out the government in terms of how they are dealing with wasteful spending. They don't focus on the main issues, like this one, for example. It's funny, these guys have a name that's similar to like a Astroturf group, the Integrity Institute. But from the research we've done into these guys, they don't appear to be an Astroturf group. They only say that they represent themselves. This is from like an old retired couple, very adorable, very wholesome, and they've been doing a lot of research into the COVID wage subsidy. And from their research, mainly by OIAs, they have surmised that there is about $10 billion that could be clawed back from the wage subsidy. About $10 billion. And now a lot of people might think that, you shouldn't criticize labor, people's lives are on the line, but they haven't asked these businesses to give back these overpaid subsidies. And, just think about the context. During the COVID period, some of New Zealand's, in this article, spin-off article, some of New Zealand's biggest businesses are making huge profits thanks to the wage subsidy. And the Integrity Institute points out that, the shutdown period was for, say, like the shutdown period was shorter than the period that they got money for.
right.
Okay? So they received money when they shouldn't have been in some instances. Some businesses received money that they shouldn't because they didn't need to. They didn't have any reductions in income. Their staff didn't need payments. They were fine. They were ticking over. I think it's I can appreciate the way that Labour handled things to make sure that everyone got what they needed to get. But the fact that they haven't asked anyone, they actually refused to ask.
Yeah.
They refused to ask for the clawing back of that money. $10 billion. But the Taxpayers Union has nothing to say about it. Nothing at all to say about it. Because, of course, this $10 billion, who's it gone to? It's gone to big businesses.
Their friends.
I won't labor it too much, but there are lots of resources on this website of the Integrity Institute pulling up the various examples. And this article here from the spin-off, talking about all sorts of companies that had record profits in some instances. And so, the Taxpayers Union, they're not really a lobby group for taxpayers. They're a lobby group for corporations. And it's corporations who primarily benefited from the wage subsidy. That's why they're not coming out against the wage subsidy. Not only that, but the Taxpayers Union, this is funny, they got on the back of unions saying that unions should pay back the wage subsidy. And after vowing to never take... Yeah, but also after vowing to never take taxpayer money, the Taxpayers Union ended up taking the wage subsidy. And now they've made their excuses, They ended up paying back the wage subsidy because they couldn't handle, the negative press and our perception of them changing. So they paid back the wage subsidy, but as a lot of economists have pointed out, it's essentially for them acted like an interest-free loan. So they're able to use it for when they wanted to use it, and then when things suited them, when they're back in the green, they give it back. And it's worked out for them. Speaking of $60,000 and wasting money, the Auckland Council has figured out that the Taxpayers Union has cost them around $60,000 in staff time because of the amount of OIAs that the Taxpayers Union puts through to Hamilton Council. So that's just the Hamilton Council. Imagine Auckland Council. Imagine all of the other councils throughout the country. Imagine the amount of money that the Taxpayers Union is wasting in terms of their obsession to find money spent on Māori initiatives. You know, it's just crazy. So billions likely lost to tax evasion as white collar crime investigators go underfunded. So this is a great article here pointing out the hypocrisy, the corruption in our system of how we don't pursue white collar crime. People are more likely to go after benefit fraud rather than high level tax evasion. And, you know, it's estimated that tax evasion costs our country around potentially $7 to $10 billion. Whereas benefit fraud, what's the...
like 2 million or something?
2 million?
Oh, could be wrong.
Okay. We're being lazy here, but we do have the figures
we had
here.
It up.
It's a minuscule amount anyway. So, you know, benefit fraud in this article, she talks about, she says, I'll bring up her name, Lisa Marriott. And she is a professor of taxation at Victoria University of Wellington. And she says we spend $49 million in the most recent year investigating benefit fraudsters. We don't spend anything like that resourcing the Serious Fraud Office or the Financial Markets Authority. Okay, what is it? What's the number for benefit fraud?
80 million.
80 million?
So it's a lot more than 2 million.
Okay, I'm glad we checked. 80 million a year for benefit fraud. Okay.
Versus 8 to 10 billion.
Versus 8 to 10 billion. Okay, so why is the Taxpayers Union not talking about this loss of 7 to 10 billion? And why are they not criticizing this focus that we have towards benefit fraudsters instead of all of these billionaires and millionaires and their huge companies throwing their money in various trusts, all of their dodgy charities and whatnot? Why is that not the focus of our resources to claw back money?
Well, from a taxpayer union perspective, the money is far more well spent when they're clawing back tax evasion, because they're going to get back a lot more money than when they're clawing back the benefit fraud, because while the average tax evader dodges $270,000, the average welfare fraudster steals $70,000. So if you're every dollar that you spend clawing back tax evasion, you get more dollars back. So just from a taxpayer union perspective, makes sense to spend money getting back tax evasion money, but you'll never ever see them waging a full-blown, and I don't mean just a tweet, because I know how they do to cover their ass with just a little tweet here and there. They'll never wage a full-blown campaign talking about the wage subsidy or tax evasion or the money spent going after benefit fraudsters.
Exactly.
It will always go for things that are meant to benefit society and the community and Māori.
Mm-hmm. And this is why we say we have, you know, a class apartheid system here in Aotearoa. You know, we have an apartheid society here. It's not an apartheid based on racial discrimination, though. It's a class apartheid. And here, in terms of welfare fraudsters, she notes 60% chance of being jailed. 60% chance of being jailed for a welfare fraudster. Whereas if you're a tax evader, only 22% chance of being locked up. So the focus, of course, is our people who are struggling, people who are in poverty, people who are on the welfare.
And of course, that statistic is warped by the fact that they don't even investigate the majority of tax evaders. Mm-hmm. So it would be even smaller, the percentage of them locked up, if they were investigating them at the same rate as the benefit fraudsters.
Right. And at the bottom of this article, Dr. Marriott, bless Dr. Marriott, has received, it says, $350,000 grant from the Marsden Fund to continue research into why there is inequity between the rich and poor.
Oh, thank goodness for the Marsden Fund.
Thank goodness for the Marsden Fund. Oh, what's that? Government's Marsden Fund cuts. Oh. So that's the kind of stuff that they've been cutting because they don't want that kind of research pointing to those types of hypocrisies. Oh boy. Oh boy. It's a shame. It's a shame, but that's the society we have.
Yeah, they don't want anyone to point out the issues that we have in our society, and that's why this government is currently systematically defunding any public research groups or groups that do any social sciences, any research into how bad the situation is, because if you don't know how bad the situation is, then how can you solve it, right? So
There's no problems if you just get rid of our knowing of the problem.
yeah. So that's the Taxpayers Union.
That's the Taxpayers Union. I mean, there are a million other things, right? We could literally talk all night long about the Taxpayers Union and Free Speech Union, etc., 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 etc. But we've just tried to keep a few examples in there so that we can still cover a few other things before everyone falls asleep. So
But I think we shouldn't. I think we should wrap it up actually, because almost 3 hours.
There's so many other things that we wanted to talk about.
We wanted to talk about the citizens' arrest. We wanted to talk about the
Cook
coverage.
Islands update, Palestine update.
We could let's do a quick.
Let's do it.
Let's just do one. Let's just do. No, I was going to say let's just do the quick Cook Islands update.
You know what? Let's let the people decide. Let's let the people
I
decide.
think because we're getting close to 3 hours.
Well, I'll be honest. So normally we try to record everything so that we can create reels and all sorts of stuff. But my computer has run out of memory, so none of this has actually been recorded. So we can't actually make any of our little reels out of this. So maybe we should do another episode in a couple days.
I was thinking we can do a halfway week. Just to quickly tell everyone, we wanted to talk about the update, which where is it now? The Cook Island. Let's just do this really quickly. So
Good night story.
Yeah, you've probably seen, over the last couple of weeks, the media bashing of the Cook Islands Prime Minister and the government complaining just because they had a meeting with China and made a deal with China like we have numerous times before. So, and you would have also seen that they did a confidence vote. Is that what they call it?
A vote of no confidence.
A vote of no confidence in Parliament. And the media blew this up as well. They often do that, right? They blow up a negative aspect of a story, but then they won't follow it through if it doesn't give them what they want. So they did this vote of no confidence, and he survives it. He passes it. And we already know this. We already knew that his cabinet supported him because they came out and said so previously. But they did this vote, and now we have the result, and he survives. Most of his cabinet support him. It's the opposition who don't support him, so that's normal. But you can see how New Zealand's government and media weaponize the opposition against the Prime Minister of Cook Islands and sowed tension and division within the Cook Islands, a very small community of 17,000 people. So it's easy for New Zealand as a colonial power to get in there and sow division and distrust in their own government. And so look at what Mike Brown says. I think it's very telling itself.
I can't believe we're showing a News Talk ZB article, by the way.
Here it is. He said, this constant media barrage, Mr. Speaker, has now led to destabilization of our country. He told Parliament, this motion of no confidence has been built on misinformation. So that's the New Zealand government and New Zealand media destabilizing a former colony of ours because we didn't like their political decisions. We didn't like that they were forming a closer friendship with China, who's a declared enemy of the United States. But do you know what's also really funny about this story is that Winston Peters, he's just been to China. And they do all this tough talk, but it's really just theater. So, Winston Peters getting angry at the Cook Islands and, that's sending a message to Cook Islands. It's trying to exert our power over them. But then with someone like China, who obviously we have no power over as in tiny little New Zealand, but they're also our biggest trading partner. So we want to be friendly with them. Winston Peters was so soft. the best he could do was ask China if they could please let us know a little bit earlier the next time that they do a Navy. You know how they brought their ships close to New Zealand and they made a big hoopla about it after this Cook Island thing? Well, once Winston Peters went over there, it was deflated. It wasn't even a big thing. Like, China was like, okay, what do you guys even want? And then Winston Peters was like, can you just please tell us just a little bit earlier? And then China was like, okay, sure, we'll let you know a little bit earlier. And that's it. That's it. So all this big fuss that they made about the Navy, oh, we're so angry at China. It's nothing really, and it's nothing that we are capable of bringing up with them because they did everything according to the law. Not only that, now I'm getting into my China story accidentally, but we have done exercises outside China in the Taiwan Strait with Japan. We have done this to them in a show of power, with not only New Zealand showing their power, but New Zealand and the entire Western Empire. The US-led Western Empire has been exerting its power, pointing their missiles at China. They've put military base in Australia so that they can have a war with China really easily. That's why the Pacific is an important stronghold for the United States. And they're trying to make out like China is exerting their power. And yeah, I think what we've seen is that the news is capable of blowing this up. They're capable of sowing issues within small island countries in order to turn people against their government. And that's dangerous because that's like a soft coup. Like, if you turn people against their government through your media, through your, politicians spreading misinformation and such, you can turn a country against their own government and then put in a government of your choosing that benefits you. That's what the United States does all over the world, except they actually are happy to use power and to force their way to do it. But New Zealand trying to do it through this, soft power approach. I just think it's really disgusting. And we're doing all of this just to appease our American overlords. So it's very shameful.
Shame.
And, now, of course, they're wanting to increase our military budget. So maybe we do a midweek episode on that. But this is another thing that we need to be very wary of and to protest against.
We need to be demilitarizing the Pacific. All of our kōrero, all of our initiatives, all of our asks should be asking for the demilitarization of the Pacific. But all of this narrative is pushing us to what it seems like is extreme militarization of the Pacific. New Zealand's position, we firmly need to be advocating for peace and demilitarization and to have a neutral stance in all of this. But we're siding, neutral stance should be the go. But more and more we see our political leaders parroting and siding with the United States, which we really do need to be pushing back against. Otherwise, who knows what kind of war games we could be feeding into.
And it's dangerous. It's dangerous for us, and it's dangerous for our Pacific sibling islands. In fact, when we have these discussions about, there was this one hawkish, warmonger who said that New Zealand needs to put boots on the ground. I think her name is Anne-Marie Brady. Put boots on the ground, and she wants us to put a military base on some of these Pacific islands. The things that I find a lot of things very disturbing about this, but one of the most disturbing things I find about this is that they just find random Westerners in New Zealand to pontificate about whether we should invade the islands, basically, or, turn them into the United States war theater, to turn them into a massive military base for the United States to use as a war against China, but they're not centering the voices of those people living in those islands. And that gets me so much. Like, what do the people living in those islands think? What do they want? Do they want us to put boots on the ground? Do they want the islands to become the United States military base against China? Like, I want to hear from and I don't mean the opposition party of Mark Brown. I want to hear from people on the ground. I want to hear from the Samoans who are still dealing with our ship that sunk off the coast. What do they think? Why do we not hear from actual people living in the islands and their experiences on the ground. Why do we pontificate about what we think is best for them?
Mm-hmm.
Why do we keep, it's like astroturfing again, right?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's just such a colonial attitude that we have to the islands, that they need to be subservient, that if we want them to be a military base, heck, that's what they'll be. And we talked about this last time as well. The United States has a history of putting military bases in islands and causing a lot of harm, whether it's the destruction of the environment, whether it's rape, whether it's abuse of their citizens. It's never gone well for people to host military bases in the United States. And maybe we'll cover this in a midweek episode, because it is concerning. Now they're wanting to. We've been on this road to getting closer to nature all along, but it seems pretty certain to me that we are heading towards the path of supporting the United States and trying to antagonize China. And, we looked at the military bases that the United States has around the world last time. They're already basically surrounding China.
Yeah.
The Pacific Ocean is the only place they haven't fully militarized yet. And they're wanting to do that because it's a strategic position against China. And we're playing along in those games.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it's the same political parties that are anti-Māori and that are transphobic, that we've been talking about all night, that are pushing for increased military spending. It's the same group. They hate all of us.
And that's why we're a strong team. That's why people power and people movement is the way. They're pissing off all of us. When the government first came into power, they even pissed off the police. Even police were complaining. And so, my hope and my desire is that they're pissing off enough of us that we're all joining our social issues together, joining our struggles together, and creating these connections, understanding why Indigenous rights is important for, not just climate justice, but saving all of our ecosystems. With rongoā being applied, rongoā, the opposite direction of genetic engineering, actual safe medicines that don't need to be tested for 20 years because of all the various random poisons that they could be putting out. All of these things are connected. Gender ideology, being able to be more fluid and comfortable no matter who or what you are. All of these things are connected in terms of holistic well-being and holistic health. So, the hope is that we're all figuring it out, that your struggle is my struggle is your struggle, and that we're stronger together.
Kia ora, kia ora.
And let's end with this awesome little resource here that's been created by Network Waitangi Whangare, a tiriti education kaupapa here in the far north, or
Legends.
The mid-north, I should say. And yeah, they've uploaded to YouTube all of the treaty, the oral submissions against the Treaty Principles Bill. They've uploaded all of them, and they've put chapters. If you click on a particular video, if you're looking for someone, you can see down in the description, they've listed everybody with timestamps and the person's name. It's an incredible resource. Every time we turn on the oral submissions and listen, we hear someone's submission and we're like, oh man, that was an amazing submission. Like every time we turn it on, unless it's some racist talking about their misinformation, we're like, wow, that was incredible. So if you're wanting to learn more about Te Tiriti o Waitangi, the reasons why everyone is upset about it, and the justifications for why honoring Te Tiriti is so important, highly recommend you check out these submissions.
They will blow you away. Like, basically the brightest minds in the country have come to submit on this. You know, and a lot of people I will have seen as well around, because they're like well-known professors, or they're well-known poets, or they're well-known writers in some way. A lot of these people are well-known in those fields, but even the people who are not well-known, even the people who are just your average person, Joe Blog, giving their submission on behalf of themselves only, they have been incredible. Every single person has shown such a high level of intelligence, such a high level of awareness of Te Te Tiriti and our constitutional arrangement and all the breaches of Te Tiriti by the Crown, that it's brought me to tears so many times, because what I have seen is that there has been an outflow of love and support for Te Tiriti and for Te Iwi Māori. And these people, you know, it's not just individuals submitting for themselves. You look under it, and they are charitable trusts. They are the Māori Women's Welfare League. They are
Students Association. Yeah,
an Otago Students Association. They are the, you know, a conglomeration of health professionals. They are councils all up and down the country. City councils have been submitting against this. They are the Council of Trade Unions. That, you know, they're unions that have tens of thousands of members. So a lot of these submitters are speaking on behalf of thousands of people. And they've all come out against this. I mean, everyone has come out against this. The only people that have submitted against the treaty, the only people that have submitted for the treaty submissions bill are renowned racists. The people that we already knew through us following Hobson's Pledge.
Yeah.
And the ACT Party.
Yeah. Pretty much every single one who supports the Treaty Principles Bill, they are a part of either Hobson's Pledge, the Stop Co-Governance Group, Free Speech Union,
ACT Party.
Yep.
Like Stephen Franks.
They're all part of that group.
And maybe a few who are not associated with them, but they're immigrants. A few of them were immigrants who just seemed really confused about the history of this country.
Potentially sucked in by the ACT Party narrative. Potentially.
Yeah.
Potentially. But the overwhelming majority of people, of course, against the bill, which has been...
Overwhelmingly.
That's what we knew was going to happen, but it's been a beautiful thing.
And you know, the news, they, at the beginning of this, on the first day of the submission, they covered the absolute first day of submission, which was when David Seymour submitted, right? And not since then. So they covered this first day. They covered the first day of submissions, and they talked about David Seymour's submission. They gave him ample time. And then they were like, oh, yes, and here's a couple people against it as well, and a couple people for it, and they just made it seem even. But since then, it hasn't really made the news unless I've missed it. And that's because when you do look at what's happening, it's very blatantly clear that this is an argument between the most intelligent, distinguished, and just representative groups of society, because they are the spokespeople for their communities coming to speak, versus just a few old racist dinosaurs that say stuff like, we've got apartheid, you know, and they actually say outrageous things. They don't sound good. They don't sound reasonable. And they are vastly outnumbered. So this whole process, it didn't turn out the way they wanted to, as we were saying earlier, I believe. Because it's just shown that there is a unity in this country. We are actually united for Te Tiriti. And those minority voices, the fact that we know the vast majority of them submitting makes me feel good. It's like we already know who the main racists are in this country, and a few uninformed old white people and a few immigrants. But the vast majority of them, we already know them, whereas I had no idea that all these student associations and health professionals and you know, of course I knew all the iwi and hapu were gonna be against it, but even them, they're blowing me away with their detailed, incredible submissions. And just I don't want to be mean, but the level of intelligence is very clearly different. The level of intelligence of the people who are submitting who have their extremely detailed submissions, versus the people submitting against who just do not have a grasp of history. They don't have a grasp of Te Tiriti.
I mean, I just think they're disingenuous, you know?
Right.
I think some of them are quite intelligent, but they're running with a disingenuous argument. And they're trying to use their intelligence to deceive us, but unfortunately for them, we're all smarter than they think we all are. Like, ACT Party supporters, New Zealand First supporters, do they actually believe in this shit? Or do their followers just think it's a convincing lie that's going to trick the rest of us? You know, do they actually believe in this bullshit, or are they just happy to go along with what they think is a convincing lie so that they can get what they want out of it? I don't really know, but for me, you know, it's not like these people are stupid. They're just running with some bullshit because they think it's going to get them what they want.
Some of them sound stupid. Some
Okay.
of them sound.
Trying to be nice here, but I think we need to close the stream. Samah is getting a bit too. But yeah, come on.
Seriously, some of these old dinosaurs submitting, they just sound so silly and so ignorant and uninformed. And I think it's too embarrassing to showcase them. So the news is just like not talking about the treaty principles bill at all. I think I would love to see in the end, when we have the outcome, how many of those 300,000 were for and against. And I'd also
the age of everyone.
Oh yeah, that's another thing. Not one young person has submitted for the treaty principles.
The Asian immigrant fellow that
He
we
was the
saw today.
father.
He was
No. I'm talking rangatahi.
From a Māori perspective, he's a rangatahi.
He has children.
He's a rangatahi.
Okay. Let me reframe. No under 18. Not one under 18 submitted for this bill. They were all extremely old except for that one young immigrant fella. But yeah, whereas on the other hand, there are a whole bunch of kids, a whole bunch
Diversity.
of teenagers,
So
like we
diverse.
said, student groups, of all backgrounds. This incredible poet as well.
Kapai. I think we've labored the point. They're amazing. Eteiui, please go and watch them if you need some motivation around Te Tiriti o Waitangi. We'll end it there. Thank you everyone for being with us tonight, and a special thank you to Tulua Wilson, who's been adminning the comments.
What a legend.
The comment section has been pretty timid, so there hasn't been any mahi to keep you busy. Aroha mai. We'll have to attract more of these others. No, I like that we don't need the comment section to be moderated, and I guess because there's not too many people here, it's been pretty chill. But
let's enjoy it as well.
Special thank you to you, and of course, just thank you to everyone else who has come. I don't know if we should do a mid-week stream or if we should just get solid what we want to present for next week's stream, because I think, and it's becoming more evident to me, is that we try and put too much stuff into a single episode. So I don't know what everyone else thinks. Maybe let us know what you think.
Some feedback would
If
be
we
good,
if we should try and condense our stuff down and talk less and more about specific kaupapa and try and nail something, or if people are just happy for us to kind of yarn like this for potentially 4 hours kind of thing. But yeah, let us know. Mōri ora kia tātou. Thank you all so much. Have a good night.
Mōri ora. Enjoy your Friday night, everyone.
Ka kite. See you in the next one.
Love yous. Bye.
Thanks everyone. Really appreciate it.